Hey, everybody. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining my guest, who is the fantastic Dr. Kristi Winters. Kristi, how are you?
I am doing well, as we talked about off air. I'm a little bit tipsy, and in case I start to sober up, I have a bit of wine still left.
Just in
So,
case.
just in case, yes. How are you, Steve?
I am wonderful, and this was your idea, so thank you for
Ooh,
suggesting this. And also, thank you for showing up in your Quentin Tarantino drug dealer cosplay with your robe on, which I think is
yes,
a great, is very appropriate, given the subject matter.
yes,
Because all drug dealers, and I'm not saying that you are a drug dealer, but you're dressed as one in a Tarantino movie, because all drug dealers in Tarantino movies wear bathrobes.
correct.
So it's
Yes.
just
Now, by way of explanation, I had a friend who stopped by and brought 2 bottles of wine. And I couldn't say no. And so I asked Steve, like, do you want me to? I gave him an hour's notice. I'm like, do you want me to hardcore sober up? He's like, no, tipsy, Christy, it's fine.
it's
So
fine.
that's the explanation.
But yeah, so we're going to talk about the 2015 film The Hateful Eight, which of course was written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. But before we get to talk about the movie, which I think we both have some thoughts on, Christy? What are some of your sort of thoughts or feelings about Tarantino's work in general? Like, where do you stand with him before we get into the movie itself?
I remember watching Pulp Fiction broadcast, or I should say, projected at the second level of my student union. And that
Oh
was the
wow,
first time I saw it. And it blew my mind. It completely blew my
yeah,
mind. And then I went back and watched Reservoir Dogs. And I guess, so I'm familiar with, I've kind of been in paying attention to movies since he got big, and I'm aware of a lot of his work.
yeah.
I find, gosh, he's a very intelligent filmmaker on a lot of different levels, especially as he's matured over time. I think his subject matter is obviously focused on his interests.
Hmm.
Um, and whatever, sometimes he goes through phases of things, which is fine. That's part of growing up. And obviously, he's been criticized for like taking from a lot of other influences and
Oh
putting
yeah.
it into his films. But I feel now he's finding his own voice and very much like establishing a Tarantino feel that we're going to see moving forward for however many more films he makes in his lifetime. That said, and it's hard to say I enjoy Tarantino. I'm affected by it.
Yeah.
It impacts me. I think about it a lot, not always in a pleasant way, but I don't think his movies are made to make us happy. I think he uses the full range of human. I think he deliberately provokes reactions in audiences through his use of suspense and language, as we'll get into.
Oh
So
yes.
I guess that's the most, like, I want to say charitable, because I can be critical, but I'll just say in a more pleasant overall way. Those are my thoughts. And what would be your answer to that question?
I think I do enjoy a lot of his work. I saw Pulp Fiction was also the first one of his films that I think Pulp Fiction, unless you're like a movie person and you were a movie person in the early '90s, I think Pulp Fiction was probably the first of his films that most people saw,
Yeah,
because Reservoir Dogs got a lot of attention, but it wasn't like a big hit.
right.
Um, but yeah, I was Pulp Fiction came out in '94, so I was 14. So I don't think I saw it until it was on video. I didn't see it in the theaters. But I
Because I'm
remember,
old.
but I remember, I was like a habitual Siskel and Ebert watcher, and Siskel and Ebert both were absolutely crazy about it, and we're talking about how, I mean, as soon as they reviewed it for their show when it came out in theaters, they were like, "This is the best film of the year. There's not going to be a better movie like that, released this year. This is it." And they stuck with that for the most part. Like I think it was the top of both of their top 10 lists that year, and of course it got a lot of awards. It was nominated for Oscars. It lost Best Picture to Forrest Gump, but it won Best Screenplay.
Yeah.
Um, and I loved it from the moment I saw it. Like there was a time when I could recite the whole thing from beginning to end. Like it was one of those movies, and I was one of those people that I could recite like the entire Tarantino movie from beginning to end. And I still really, really like it.
Yeah.
Um, but I've discovered over the years that one of the things that makes me like the Tarantino movies I like more so than the ones I like a little bit less than the others is when he's funny. His movies that are not quite as funny, or where he's not
Mhm.
trying so hard to be funny, I tend to stick with me a little less. The fact that because Pulp Fiction more than anything else is a comedy, and it's a very violent comedy and it's a very dark comedy. But ultimately, I think Pulp Fiction is a comedy, and I think a lot of his best movies can be categorized as really really black comedies,
Mm.
and I think that's his best genre. But I've admired all of his films in one way or another. There are some of them that I have liked a lot more than others. Pulp Fiction is way up on the list. Kill Bill, especially Kill Bill Part Two, I think is really really good. Jackie Brown is fantastic.
Mhm.
There are, and there are others of his that I admire a great deal, but don't necessarily feel a lot of personal affection for, like Inglorious Bastards. That
Mhm.
definitely has moments that I think are great, but I don't like look on that as fondly as I do a movie like Jackie Brown or Pulp Fiction. Um, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, very similar. And this movie that we're going to talk about today, Hateful Eight, which I probably enjoyed the least of all of his films.
Oh.
Uh, Not to say that I think it's a bad movie, but the ratio of my problems with it to the amount of it that I enjoyed and admired is there. It's much closer to even than his other films. You know what I mean? But like my main problem with Tarantino isn't. I mean, he's a fantastically talented director and writer, uh, but he as a person is just a lot to take, and that wouldn't be so bad because there are. I mean, there are a lot of creative people who are not as you might wish them to be from watching their work. But like, his attitude toward criticism of his work
Mm.
has always been really touchy and really juvenile. His attitude toward when people criticize him for like the amount of things he borrows from other stuff, and
Mhm.
does he cross the line from homage to just flat out ripping people off? He's really touchy about that. He's really touchy about the N-word thing that we're going to talk about here in a minute.
Mhm.
And just recently with the controversy of his portrayal of Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he seems to like his side of that story doesn't seem to be based in any kind of reality that I've ever been familiar with. Like, I'm not necessarily a scholar about Bruce Lee, but the Bruce Lee that he not only depicts in the movie, but describes in interviews as like having supposedly been the real Bruce Lee, I've never heard that from anybody else. Like, I've never heard anybody else who
Mm.
knew Bruce Lee or has done research into his life talk about Bruce Lee being an asshole to that degree. He was apparently confident and maybe a little bit cocky sometimes, but this depiction that Tarantino has of him, of like a guy who went out of his way to be a dick to people on sets and disrespected stuntmen and was like an over the top prick and full of himself. Like, I've never heard that. I've never heard the real Bruce Lee described that
Mm.
way. So the fact that Tarantino has sort of stuck with that so stubbornly to justify his portrayal of Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is just weird. It's just like, why are you're like the only person saying that Bruce Lee was like that. So
Why are you so stubborn about these hang-ups?
yeah, that's yeah, just in general, his hangups in general, I think he's stubborn about them. But he's an incredibly talented guy, and he's made
Mhm.
some great work, and most of his work I would say I admire more than I love, but there are a couple of examples of his body of work that I do genuinely love and take to my heart and think, oh boy, those are some of my favorite films. But yeah, he's definitely, there's a lot you have to swallow along with that for sure.
Yes. Talking about the issue of, separating the art from the artist.
Oh
Kind of
yes.
challenge, right?
Oh
And
yes.
on that topic, I think, Tarantino wouldn't be possible without postmodernism.
Oh
He
yeah.
is, if you want to talk about like a postmodern creator, I think he would be an example of the impact of postmodernism on cinema and
Almost
storytelling.
compulsively. Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
he deconstructs at times when he doesn't even need to. you know
Yeah.
Like, because well, like he does in Hateful Eight, he does a non-linear thing, where like he tells you the story up to a certain point, and then he backs up and shows you stuff that happened before we came in,
Yes.
and he does that in almost all of his movies.
Plays
It's
with time a lot in
yeah,
structure of narrative and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's questionable
No.
whether it's always necessary or whether it's always beneficial, but
Yeah, I think that's fair. But there's no traditional hero's journey here
oh
in the
yeah,
Hateful Eight.
oh God,
No.
no. Oh no, 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 definitely
No.
not. Who is even? I mean, I guess the closest to a hero would be the Samuel L. Jackson character, and even he is far from heroic in many aspects. I
Yes,
mean,
absolutely. On that, I was going to say that I say a little bit of drunk brain going on here, but yeah. So when it's such a well, I don't know when we want to officially start talking about like Tarantino versus the film. So I want to. One thing I do want to say before we start is I've
yeah,
seen it several more times than you, and
okay,
kind of like a red wine with a bit of space and breathing, I think I've become maybe more fond of it than
okay,
you have, but I think it's from you know how when you first, well, at least for me, this is how it is. When I watch something, I experience it. Like I start to interact, react to the characters, and I get emotionally involved. And it's very first person. It's very like, me in the situation. But then after I watched it that first time, I go back from a distance and I look at story writing and I look at the use of camera lenses and I look at the craft of how the story was put together
Mhm.
and the beats of the story and the character development. And at that point, it's more like a work of art that I'm detached from. So did you watch it more than
I watched
one
it
time?
twice. I watched it
Okay.
twice. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
we both have that perspective of kind of like seeing it both from first personal experience and then also from that
yeah. Oh,
more
definitely.
critical.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, with me, because I think I told you I had not actually. It was the only film. It was the one film of his I had not seen until I watched it to prepare for this. Wanted to see it when it came out in 2015, but I just missed it. I just didn't have time to see it, and it just kind of got away from
Mm-hmm.
me. But I mean, anytime he comes out with something, I want to see it. I'm innately curious to see what he's done next. Um, but I just didn't get to see it until this. So even though I did watch it twice, I watched it twice with the mindset of I'm watching this to get ready to talk with Kristi about it. So it's a slightly different headspace because
Mm-hmm.
I like critic brain is sort of automatically turned on.
Okay.
Even if I tell myself like, okay, this time I'm just going to watch it and just watch it like a movie, but you can't really, like, at least I can't, like, I can't really turn it off. I can't stop like noticing things and going like, oh, interesting, or oh, you know what I mean? Like it just happens automatically. So, but yeah, I did like it a little bit better the second time, but at the same time, I had all the same problems with it
Yeah.
that I had before. And
Okay.
I just want to point out before I want to get into talking about the movie, and I'm not going to interact too much with the live chat unless we want to answer questions and stuff after we're done saying what we want to say. But I did want to point out one of my regular viewers, Daralta Trekkie, said that in his opinion, Tarantino is the same kind of director as Michael Bay and Zack Snyder.
Ooh, fighting words.
Those are
I'm
fighting words to me.
gonna change my lighting here.
I change it to something red.
I
No,
do have that.
those are fighting words to me because I don't think I think that Zack Snyder has some talent maybe as a cinematographer. I think he knows a good shot when he sees it. But as storytellers, I don't think either Michael Bay or Zack Snyder are worth
Michael Bay.
are worth
Michael
half
Bay.
a Mike. Yeah,
Michael Bay.
as storytellers, I don't think either one of them are worth half a shit. I
Yeah.
honestly just think they're bad directors. And Tarantino is an extremely problematic director at times,
Yeah.
but he's brilliant. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's a fantastically talented director, and he's capable of something that I have rarely, if ever, seen in any Michael Bay or Zack Snyder film, which is thoughtfulness.
Mm.
So I want to put that out there. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, but personally, I think Tarantino does not deserve whatever problems you may have with him as a person or as a filmmaker. I do not think he deserves to be lumped in with hacks and schlockmeisters like Michael Bay and Zach. And a well-paid hack is still a hack, and that's what both of those directors are. But anyway. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about.
Should we do a synopsis?
Oh yeah. Oh sure, sure.
I don't have one prepared, but
Oh, I
there's
well, I have
you have the wiki.
I actually, you know what? I'm doing the I'm cheating with this the same way I cheat when we record late seating, when me and Jason Harding record late seating, which is I have the IMDb plot page open so that if I forget anything that happened, because sometimes we'll be going, the way we do our podcast is we go through the plot sort of scene by scene, and
Mhm.
sometimes even if I've literally just watched the movie the day before, Jason will say, "And what happens next, Steve?" And I have no idea. So it
Oh,
helps to have
yeah.
it helps to have it like on screen, so I can go like, oh well, what happened next was blah blah blah. So the Hateful Eight is a western. It takes place in Wyoming in the 1870s or thereabouts, and through a series of encounters um, and sort of random running into each other on the road, a group of eight characters end up stranded in a blizzard in this sort of roadhouse, and the characters are there's John Ruth, who is a bounty hunter who is transporting a prisoner named Daisy Domergue to what's the town that they're trying to get to?
Red Rock.
Red Rock. Yeah, they're trying to get to He's taking her to Red Rock so that she can be hanged for her crimes, right? So, and then on the way they run into Major Warren, who is Samuel L. Jackson's character, and also Chris Mannix, who claims that he is the new sheriff of Red Rock on his way to town to take up his post. And then when they get to the roadhouse, they also run into some other characters who are already there, like Senior Bob, who is the caretaker, and Oswaldo Mowbray, who claims to be the hangman from Red Rock, who is also
Mhm.
on his way into town, and Joe Gage, who is a cowboy who came with them, and General Smithers, who is an old Confederate general who's just kind of hanging out there. Um, and so all these characters are sort of thrown together, and then some other people kind of pass throughout the rest of the movie, or we see in flashbacks, or
Mhm.
things like that. And it's basically just these characters snowed in this building, and the various revelations that come out about how they know each other, how they relate to each other, how their lives have intersected in ways that maybe they didn't realize at first. Whether or not what appears to be happening is actually what is really going on. That's, there
Mhm.
are a lot of sort of twists and turns and revelations.
Bit of a whodunit
A little
at
bit
one
of a
point.
whodunit, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and shifting alliances.
Hmm.
Like characters who at first seem to be, you know, set up to be blood enemies of each other, wind up on the same side for various reasons. So it's, there's a lot going on. It's a really, really densely packed script, with a lot of detail, and is it just purely in a technical sense, just the writing,
Hmm.
not even the technical, like the filmmaking,
Yeah.
just the writing technically is impressive, because
Yeah.
there's so many pieces that are constantly shifting and fitting together and coming apart, and it's a really I can see, I know that from having heard him talk about it, I know he was particularly proud of this script, and I can see why. I mean, it's a really intricately patterned,
Hmm.
thing that he's created here. So, but that's
Definitely
basically the
perfected.
yeah, but that's
Yeah.
basically the setup.
Yes, and
Um,
also for I think people outside the states, if you don't have a deeper understanding of the politics of the like Reconstruction era and post Lincoln, I think there are some references or at least some impact of the conflicts between the North and the South that were still very much present in this film, despite it being after the Civil War.
oh
That
yeah,
that dimension is still very much at work within the characters' interactions.
absolutely. It's the defining characteristic in a lot of ways. Um, which is a good way to segue into the first thing we wanted to talk about,
Yes.
which unfortunately is something that we have to talk about for a lot of Tarantino's movies.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, but a majority of them, which is his frequent and easy use of the N word in his dialogue. I looked it up. I have a chart um, that was put together. that lists all of the usages of various forms of profanity in Tarantino movies. And the Hateful Eight features 47 uses of the N
God.
word. Now, that is not the record. The record for Tarantino, of course, is Django Unchained, which has 110 uses of the N word.
How many minutes long is
Oh,
it?
let me. You know what? You had the same thought that I had. I should have looked that up.
That
I want
is
to see.
that.
You want to see how many N words per minute?
Yeah.
Um, Django Unchained is 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that is 165 minutes.
So
So
so what is that? Like just one every 2 minutes or so?
something like
That's
that. Yeah, let me see. It's 100, 165, 110.
to get a calculator out
Yeah,
here to figure out.
that is 1.5 N words per minute. So that's the record. That's Django Unchained. It's
Yeah.
not quite as many in Hateful Eight, but still quite a few. Hateful Eight is second place for number of N words in a Tarantino movie. So and a lot of them are used. Let's just say aggressively. You know, it's not just sort of people saying it like they would say other
Hmm.
profanities, like just to sort of flavor their speech. It's one. It's usually a white character using the N word to attack a black character.
Hmm.
That's I didn't do an exhaustive scientific survey of it, but I think that accounts for most of the usages in Hateful Eight. It's a
I
white,
kn-
yeah,
yeah, I know that he was out in the bar and they have a whole conversation about him and his letter from Lincoln.
yeah,
And the so I think the only character the character who uses it the least is the hangman, John.
yes,
But of course he does that thing where he's like, he says black fella, and then he says, "Don't you know?" And I apologize to everybody that when he's correcting Daisy, makes reference to the word darkies
yeah.
as if that's an improvement.
Yeah,
Yes.
which is kind of a joke because from our modern perspective, we're supposed to laugh at that because it's like, oh, you know, we like a word that we would still consider horribly disrespectful was considered the polite word, you know, at least in Tarantino's version of this back then,
Yes.
you know.
And I think
Uh,
that's also an important point that we're looking at Tarantino's imagining of what the Old West would have been like.
right.
And I think he does try to be authentic because I was reflecting on this and I was thinking, would people just drop the N word that often? And then I remember Mark Twain,
Oh boy.
right? The
Yeah.
character's name.
Yeah. N-word Jim. Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I see the historical grounding for this flippant use. I do think that it still does get to be gratuitous because I think the impact that at least it has on me when it was delivered as lines is like there should be some meaning behind it. And so if you just kind of pepper it out throughout the script, it ends up becoming something you just get desensitized to by the end of it, or a bit
Yeah.
more. So
Yeah, I feel like, and you know, it's just it's a part of Tarantino's voice as a writer at this point, and you almost expect it. Like if you watch a Tarantino movie for the first time you hear it, you're like, oh, there it is. You know, like you're not really, if you're familiar with Tarantino's work, it doesn't really surprise you anymore because it's just like it might elicit like a little bit of an eye roll, like, oh, here he goes. You know, that's one. How many are we going to get? Um, I think the problematic part of it to me is knowing that Tarantino feels entitled to use it as often as he does. You know, and there's a little bit. I know, like some people have talked about it in terms of like Tarantino claiming that he has like a ghetto pass. You know, like he's one of the white people who's allowed to say it.
mhm.
But I don't think it's that so much. I think he feels like he has a writer's pass, like because he's a writer and he's telling a story that he can use it as much as he feels like he needs to, and he should be immune from people having a problem with it because hey, he's just telling a story. Come on. Um,
I
but
would build. Can I build on that?
yeah,
I think
please,
it says
please.
also his attitude toward violence.
Oh, I would agree with that too. Yeah.
that if it furthers the story, if it has the impact on the audience that I want, then it's a tool that I'm able to use as a writer and artist to create this thing because I'm looking for this reaction, or I want to get across this message. So don't criticize me.
I think he feels that way about pretty much everything in his work, and I
Mm-hmm.
think
Mm-hmm.
and so do a lot of other artists and writers, and I personally think that's a really irresponsible attitude. But that's just me. Um, especially since with the N word in particular, it's been an issue for decades now. The fact that Tarantino, as a white filmmaker, feels at liberty to use it so freely. Um, and feels like, well, but I'm an important director. Like I should be allowed to use it because I'm telling a story and the story needs it, or whatever. Um, that's been his attitude all along. That I should be immune from the criticism for using this word, and yet it's been an issue for so long, and it's been brought up to him so often.
I mean, Pulp Fiction,
Yeah,
right? He used
yeah.
it. He used it in Pulp
Yes, he
Fiction.
did. Yes, he himself. It comes out of his mouth, and
Mm-hmm.
I think does he say it in Django too? Because I know he plays
Oh,
he.
I don't remember
I
how he
don't remember. All
sounds.
I remember from Django is his Australian accent.
It's terrible. Terrible.
I'm like, it's bad enough that, I mean, he's obvious. That's another thing about, as his career has gone on and he has continued to make movies and his reputation has sort of
Mm-hmm.
been built up and up. You catch him fucking around more often than you used to, and I feel like him playing that little bit part in Django where he's playing the Australian guy. Like, okay, Quentin, you're just fucking around.
Yeah.
Like, get serious, man. You're just fucking around. There's no reason why you had to play this guy. There's no reason why you had to make him Australian if you knew you
Yeah.
were playing him. Like, but whatever. Um, but yeah, so the fact that it goes back. You see this reflected in his response to people criticizing him for the Bruce Lee thing, where I just saw
Mm-hmm.
I don't listen to Joe Rogan's podcast because life's too fucking short, but I saw the clip of him where he was addressing it on when he was on the Rogan show a couple weeks ago, where he said, basically, I understand why Bruce Lee's daughter has a problem with it because that's her dad, but everybody else who has a problem with it can suck a dick, is what he said. And I thought, oh, dude, like,
White male entitlement.
yeah. And it's like, it doesn't mean you have to agree with it or you have to just roll over and say you're sorry, but God damn it, be a little thoughtful about it. Like, be receptive
Listen.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Understand that people aren't just trying to get at you. Like, they have actual concerns about this. And it's the same thing with the N word. It's like, it's not just people clutching their pearls going, oh, a naughty word, an impolite word. Like, that's a really rough word in the English
Mm-hmm.
language. It has so much pain and hate and history attached to it. And for you to just keep throwing it out there, and hiding behind, well, I'm a writer,
Yeah.
that just doesn't do it for me. And it doesn't do it for a lot of people.
I think he would have a more, let's say, plausible creative argument if, again, it was deployed tactically. Like, for instance, the general was the
Yeah.
one who used it basically, like, not almost exclusively, but he would be the one who would toss it out more easily. Or when people were being particularly demeaning or trying to hurt him, in those instances. But as you say, because it's just kind of thrown around gratuitously, I think
Yeah.
it doesn't. Again, it loses its creative credibility, as it were. And in all honesty, you could probably have the entire film without the word, and there are other ways that they could show their contempt without using that particular phrase. They could refer. So I think, again, I mean, I'm very mixed on it because on the one hand, be, it shows how pervasive white supremacy probably really was.
Oh, sure.
And it was like, an apartheid state. We think, South Africa, oh, they were so bad. Hello. Like, look
Yeah.
around to American
Yeah.
culture.
Exactly.
We invented that shit. Um,
Exactly.
and so you get more of the sort of racial divisions between there. So again, I think you could, I don't want to defend it, but I can at least see a creative justification. And I've watched a couple people's reactions to this, including people of color, and they do point it out initially, but then honestly, I think maybe as a white person, it has a different, more sustained, it has a unique impact on me because in Black culture, that word has context in which it can be used. I'm not saying that
Right.
they're okay with it in the use of it, but it emotionally, first time I watched it, it really was like a slap in the face almost every time it came up in the dialogue. It was distracting to me because I've removed that word so much from my entire life, except
Yeah.
to refer to it as the N word.
Right.
That's how I know it. So I don't know. I think it's really complicated too, in terms of perspective, because that was also true to the degradation that people had to experience. And I don't want to again justify it, but when you look at how Major Marquis
Yeah.
reacts and justifies his use of the Lincoln letter, which we haven't even got to yet,
Yes.
it shows the system, like the entire facing America as a Black man, as he says. So I don't know. Again, I don't want to justify it, but I'm trying to at least, I guess, devil's advocate is what I'm looking at from a creative point of view, and also having that impact of making us feel revolted against the characters who
Yeah.
use that word.
I do think that was what I was going to bring up in terms of if you want to make an argument in favor of it. I think the best argument in favor of it is that it does, if nothing else, it establishes that these characters exist in a world that is that casually racist, that you do hear that word that often. And it was, I'm sure that's probably true to the historical period that this film is set. And you know, it's also it's true to the place where I grew up. I mean, when I was a kid, I heard, I don't know if I heard it quite as often as you hear it in a Tarantino movie, but it was thrown around by white people because I there was only white people in my town where I grew up. You know what I mean? Like I grew up in rural Western Maryland where,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there was like the town I grew up in had 600 people. There was no Black community. Like it was a white town, and white people there, including people in my family, uh, use that word freely. You know, so I heard it constantly when I was a kid, and if I spent more time there as an adult, I would probably hear it constantly now because I really don't think things have changed that much. Um, so it does. There is a ring of truth to it. Like, you know what I mean? I can't criticize it by saying people don't talk like that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because they do. And but that's not the issue. The issue is it responsible and is it necessary for a filmmaker, particularly a white filmmaker, to use
Yes.
it as often as he does,
Mm-hmm.
and as casually as he does. And I think that's really the problem. You know,
Yeah.
you can't just try, because I mean, like, spousal abuse is unfortunately a fact of life as well. But if there was a particular filmmaker
Mm-hmm.
who showed
Just
like a man beat,
casually.
yeah, who showed like, yeah, casual, like man on woman violence in all of
Mm-hmm.
his films, but never seemed to have anything particular to say about it, you might think like, why is there so much wife beating in his movies?
Mm-hmm. Fair
You
enough.
know?
Yeah, no, if you move this to a different topic, I think that's a good way to give it a different perspective. Like, would you apply the same justifications or defenses or rationales to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a valid
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, but and I guess we can use that. I didn't plan it this way, but we can use that to segue into the another thing that we wanted to discuss that you listed in your notes, which is the use of violence in the film, and the use of violence in Tarantino's work in general has always been
Mm-hmm.
pretty graphic and frequent, but
Yes.
and there is definitely there are some moments I don't know if I don't know how this rank. I don't think it's his most violent film or even one of his most violent films, but when it gets violent, it gets violent in a really graphic and somewhat shocking way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what were your thoughts about that?
Yes. So, okay. I did watch an interview with the cast where they talked. I think there was a discussion about the opening scene, the hangman who's taking Daisy, sorry, Daisy, in.
Yeah,
She calls Marquis the N-word, and insults him and says he shouldn't be able to ride in the carriage with them. And he cracks her over the head with a gun and causes her to bleed. Then shortly thereafter, she says something, she makes fun of him, and he doesn't like it, and so he elbows her and breaks her nose.
yeah,
Tarantino said that both of those acts were meant to make you alienated from his character. Not necessarily to empathize with Daisy as in the, but it was supposed to be a shock. It was meant to push you out of complacency, and regard him through a new lens, that he is not a good guy. The weird thing about his character as you go on, though, is, and there are, like you mentioned about spousal abuse, the relationship between Daisy and the hangman, because they're like stuck together, he also is a little bit caring of her. And they have a kind of unspoken language. Like they're riding along in the cart and she just starts tapping him. He's like, yeah, it's coming, it's coming. And he gets out some food for her to eat. They obviously have this like communication pattern that they've established. And he occasionally takes like, will take care of her, but then like an abuser, he'll just suddenly turn and become violent.
Yeah.
And that was very scary. That was very disturbing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To see both kindness and then immediate violence like that. And violence is just like a major theme throughout. Two of the characters are bounty hunters. A bunch of the other people are not upright citizens.
No.
And this was it. It was about the ambiguity of violence in the Hateful Eight. Oftentimes in film, we are given good guys or good gals or good people who have rationales. They're justified. John Wick.
Yeah.
Over a puppy in a car.
Yeah.
But
right.
It's a justification.
Right, exactly.
And the people who are the bad people are generally cardboard characters. They're just there to get beaten up on so the hero can move on with the story. But in the Hateful Eight, there isn't a justified violence. There's actually a whole discussion that not the guy who's called the hangman who's the bounty hunter, but
right.
Tim Roth's character,
who is supposedly the actual hangman from the town. Yeah.
Yes, has a whole discussion
the difference between street justice and justice. Yeah.
Yes, and that comes back at the end of the film. Although not quite for the same reasons. We all know that Daisy was guilty. She's obviously a violent sociopath. But as an audience, it's left for us to decide if any particular act of violence is morally justified. For instance, the way that Marquis taunts the general into an armed conflict. Is that justified? It might be legal, blah, blah, blah. And so he just puts that in your lap as a member of the audience and makes you kind of come to the conclusion because he's not going to give you an answer.
Yeah, I don't think... for the most part, in all of Tarantino's work, I've never been that bothered by his use of violence. Like, I think he uses violence a lot more effectively and a lot more purposefully than a lot of other directors do. I mean, it's like, someone a couple minutes ago when I took exception to him being compared to Zack Snyder. I would take I think there's more going on in a violent Tarantino movie, than there is in every violent movie Zack Snyder's ever made. And I don't think violence is usually glorified in Tarantino's work the same way that it is in Snyder, where Snyder, I think, fetishizes it and treats it almost pornographically. And I don't think Tarantino usually does that. I think there are times where you can argue that he does, or you can see that he's obviously trying to make it look cool. But I don't think that's the case in The Hateful Eight. In fact, The Hateful Eight, one of the things that makes it feel not gratuitous and not glorified in The Hateful Eight is the fact that you see that the effects of it linger. It's not one of those movies where a person gets shot like in the shoulder and just kind of shrugs it off, and by the end of the movie he seems fine. When characters get shot in this movie, like I think there are two characters, two of the longest surviving characters in the movie. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't watched it, but two of the characters who make it to the end of the movie get shot with a pretty good amount of running time left, and it seriously affects their mobility. And that at one point one of them passes out, the other one is stuck in bed for the rest of the movie. Like it's shown as being really, really destructive and harmful, not something that you just he winged me, and then it's not like that at all. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, on that, when Daisy's nose gets broken in the carriage ride, the blood stays on her face for the rest of the movie. Yeah, and they could easily have said, she went to a wash basin once they got there and washed it off. Like you could have justified having her clean her face up a little bit or resetting her nose or something, and they don't do that. They leave it there. The one thing about the violence toward Daisy that I think is maybe a little counterproductive is
I like I don't think Daisy is ever presented as a sympathetic character. I think the mere fact that she constantly is calling Marquis the N-word is enough to
Yeah.
make me not like her, and I think
Mhm.
that's intentional. I think part of that, you know, Tarantino does want to make sure that we know that Daisy is not a good person and that we shouldn't be siding with her. But at the same time, she takes such a beating
Yeah.
in this movie. And other than being verbally abusive, she really doesn't do anything that bad. We're told of that she's committed all these terrible crimes and she's a
That's
member
true.
of a violent gang.
Mhm.
But other than being verbally abusive, she doesn't do anything all that bad. So we see her being the target of continual violence throughout the movie, leading up to the very end of it.
Yes.
But it feels like, God damn, they're really kicking the shit out of her, and it's all men kicking the shit out of her, and it's like, is she really that bad that she deserves to take this much of a beating? Like, even though I never had the thought of that, you know, she was a good person, or that
Mhm.
I thought that she was a sympathetic character, but the fact that she takes such a beating, takes more of a beating arguably than any other single character in the movie, at least over a longer sustained period,
Mhm.
because like from her first scene she's getting knocked in the teeth,
Yeah.
and it's like, Jesus Christ. I feel like it's in her case, it's almost so constant that it becomes counterproductive. Because
Mm.
I do think for the ending to work, I think we can't like her. Like we have to think that she deserves to have really bad things happen to her. But you know, because we see her being a victim of so much violence,
Yeah.
it kind of works against that.
Yeah. There's a little bit of human sympathy there, just on
Yeah,
the kind of feel
yeah.
of it. But on that, now that we've brought up both racism and violent patriarchy or sexism, I think that it's the other thing that the film ends up doing because of the way that it's character driven is you see how there are shifting alliances between the various characters and they work on multiple dimensions, right?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, initially we're introduced to the white versus black, and you got Daisy and John the Hangman in the carriage together, and they meet Major Marquis, and
Hmm.
he's black, so he is like there's a racial alignment. But then when they get in the carriage and she starts being a jerk or whatever, then when the hangman John, what's his last name? I keep forgetting.
Ruth.
Ruth cracks her one. The two men bond over that violence against her.
Yeah.
And so there's also then times where like the guy who's claiming to be the sheriff is from the Confederacy, and Daisy, who's a criminal that he's going to be hanging in his town pretty soon, supports the Confederacy. And so he's like bonding with her over the fact that she, spat on the Lincoln letter. So the changing alliances and work, like, who do you trust or who do you pair with, who is on your side? It's yeah, you can analyze it from that throughout the movie, and it's very interesting. You can just look at that particular part of it and watch the characters move in these different moving alliances.
Yeah, I joked with you before we started the show that I thought the main the the take home message of the movie was misogyny fixes racism,
Right.
because
Yes.
that's one of the things that happens near the end is these two characters that have spent most of the movie at odds with each other due to racial issues become allies, and they are allied against the woman that they have both decided that they hate the woman enough that they're putting aside their racism and their racial conflict to join together to fight the evil woman. And I'm like, oh, is it, that's a nice moral. Don't
That's
worry,
yeah.
we
That's
can
it.
conquer racism with misogyny.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
and again, I mean, one of the things is like it's not entirely clear what Tarantino as the filmmaker is trying to say about that. If he's trying to say like, isn't this a messed up world, you know, that the two, you know, black and white can put their differences aside, but only if it's to abuse a woman, isn't that fucked up? Like, but that doesn't feel like that's what he doesn't feel like he's making any kind of comment at all on it.
No, I don't
he
think he is.
he's just
It's
sort
like,
of, yeah.
here's my art. Here are people who are really fucked up. You're not going to like any of them, but I'm going to put you
Yeah.
in a situation and we're going to play with it and see what happens with the dynamics. And oddly, I would make the case that although one might think of Samuel L. Jackson and his character being the main character of the story. When I thought about it, when I really thought about it, who is the central character of the story? It's Daisy. Daisy Domergue is why every single person pretty much in that room
Yeah.
is there. She's the center point
She's this,
of this
yeah,
whole
she's
thing.
definitely the center of the plot for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She's, yeah. Um, I don't know if I would say she's the central character. It's just because it's such an ensemble. I don't think it has
Narratively, I would say. Not
yeah,
screen time,
right,
but
right.
narratively, yeah.
Yeah.
She's like the linchpin that brings them all
Oh,
together.
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Um,
But she's not the star of the show, which is quite unusual.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. In fact, um, she has basically no character arc at all. Of course, a lot of the characters really don't have an arc. There aren't so much character arcs as there are revelations. You know what I mean? It's not like nobody. There's a little bit of a character arc for the two characters who make it to the end. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they travel a bit of distance, especially in terms of how they regard each other. But for the most part, it's not so much character in terms of developing the characters over the course of the story as it is like we start out thinking that they're one way and it turns out that they're somebody else, or their relationships to each other are different than we thought they were.
Yeah.
Um, you
I
know,
wonder if it is challenging for an actor to think about, I have to play this role for the second time people watch this.
yes, true, true.
So how's my expressions, what's my body language, how am I interacting with this person? Next time people watch this movie, they're going to see our relationship differently.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
everything. Yeah, and that's a level of mastery that I think, you have to kind of tip your cap to both the writing and the actors, who all of the actors in this were absolutely stellar
Oh,
as well.
absolutely. Oh my God. That's another thing about Tarantino that I think is true of all of his films. I mean, his casts are always phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned how he said that he had the hangman be shockingly violent to Daisy early on to sort of remind us that we're not supposed to like that character. And if that was his intention, that was a smart move because Kurt Russell plays that guy. So I
Yes.
automatically like him. Like
Mm-hmm.
even when Kurt Russell also he was in one of what I think is one of Tarantino's really underrated movies, which is Death Proof, which was Tarantino's half of the Grindhouse double feature. The other half was directed by Robert Rodriguez. Um,
Oh right, yeah.
yeah, and
I
of
remember that one.
those it was and of those two films, I think Death Proof is far and away the better film, and is just a really good movie and a really good showpiece for Tarantino's just his skills as a director. And Kurt Russell plays the villain in that, and he is absolutely a bastard, just totally irredeemable, and again super misogynistic, like lives
Mm-hmm.
to hurt women. And then we get to see this group of women take their revenge on him, and he's just utterly irredeemable. And yet I can't help but kind of like him because
Because
he's
it's Kurt
Kurt
Russell.
Russell. Exactly. Because he's Kurt Russell. There's this moment that is one of the more remarked upon moments in that movie when it's near the beginning and Kurt Russell, we don't yet know that Kurt Russell's character is the bad guy, right? We've just sort of seen him hanging out in a bar and he's drinking and eating some nachos and whatever. And then he offers to give a woman a lift in his car, right? And there's a shot of she gets in the car and he's standing outside the car and he's about to get in, and the camera is placed across the roof of the car looking in his
Mm-hmm.
direction, and he breaks the fourth wall and he looks into the camera and just gives a little smile like watch what I'm about to do.
Oh.
And it's gross, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also like you can't help but think, you son of a bitch, like you are such a cocky, like you're throwing it in our faces going watch the fucked up shit I'm about to do. And it's in a really sick way it's kind of charming because it's Kurt Russell, and it's like, oh man, like I don't want to hate Kurt Russell, but then at the same time when he finally gets his comeuppance at the end in this really over the top
Yeah.
cartoonish way, it's super satisfying. You know what I mean? Like it's so I mean, he's very he plays against his type, I think, very well
Mm.
because he knows, and I think Tarantino knows that he has a very naturally likable screen presence. So
Yes.
when he's playing just a really really awful character,
Yeah.
he knows that we want to like him, and he either has to go with that
And
or shake.
Tarantino's like, denied. Nope.
Yeah, he has to shake
Nope.
us out of that. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, writing in that way to specifically manipulate an audience because, yeah, he's like, hey, this Kurt Russell, everyone loves him, but he's a bad guy. So let's get this out up front. Let's deal with this now because your heart's going to get broken at some point. So we're just going to do it in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's a bad guy, but he's a bad guy in a movie full of bad guys, and he winds up being one of the least bad guys, which is like, you know.
Yeah, I think in the panel too, they were saying the Hateful Eight, nobody there is likable except for Obi. Should really be called the Hateful Eight and Obi. Because Obi didn't deserve
He doesn't really do anything. Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't deserve the end.
He's just trying to drive the damn wagon. Come on, leave him be.
But everyone else, you're kind of ambivalent. And this, I should say, is we talked about this too off air. It's Shakespearean tragedy. Like, everybody dies. I'm going to just say that now. So if you already watched
that,
it,
yeah.
know.
Don't get too attached to any of these characters.
No. But it's quite rare to see a film like where every single major character dies at the end. It's just not kind of how we do entertainment or art, cinema, or theater anymore. We want a happy ending, especially as Americans. We always want a happy ending. And Tarantino definitely denies us that. There is closure, but there's no happy ending. So,
right.
And I guess maybe because the closure ends on the Lincoln letter, do you want to move on to the theme of truth and lies?
Yeah, absolutely.
Reliable narrators?
Absolutely, yeah. Because, the Lincoln letter is a great example of how, if Tarantino maybe wanted to let us know how much racism and how much danger there was for Black people in this world, without necessarily having everybody say the N-word every 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. The Lincoln letter is a great example of that because, it's definitely an example of an unreliable narrator and of a character using an untruth as a way of protecting himself. Because, so a little bit of a spoiler here, but Major Marquis or Major Warren, Samuel L. Jackson's character, carries with him a letter that was written to him by Abraham Lincoln. And it's a very informal letter. It's not like, a commendation from a military leader or something. It's like Abe writing to his pal Marquis, to see like, how things are doing and to let him know what life is like at the White House. And there's,
oh, Mary Todd is calling. It must be time for bed.
Yeah, and he carries this and he shows it to people as a symbol of status, so that he, as a Black man, is able to pass more easily through white society because he has this totem of legitimacy, Abraham Lincoln, the president.
Can I add to that?
Yeah. Please.
Did you notice that Marquis is the only one who's wearing white gloves?
I never noticed that.
That's
almost very interesting.
Shielded.
That's very interesting.
Lincoln is his white shield, basically.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what he is. But of course, ultimately, it turns out, spoiler alert, that the letter is fake. That Marquis forged the letter because of the benefits that it conferred upon him. Because he knows, as not only as a Black man, but we also learn that Marquis is, he's in the army. Or was in the army, and now he's a bounty hunter. And he was responsible for killing a whole bunch of Confederates during the Civil War. He burned down a Confederate prison camp in order to escape. And so he's like a marked man. There's all kinds of Southerners and Southern sympathizers who would love to kill him and collect a bounty on his head because he's like this infamous guy in the South. So having this letter from Abraham Lincoln is, for
Northerners, war.
It's really valuable to him because it creates a little bit more safety for him than he would have otherwise if he were just, another Black cavalryman or whatever he was during the war. But it turns out that it's not a genuine letter.
Yeah. Can I come in on that?
Absolutely. Because
I thought it was a beautiful, I'm assuming it's intentional because it's Tarantino, but a mirroring between the way that position of basically his conversation when white people are disarmed is when I'm safe. And this
Yeah.
letter has the effect of disarming white people. And you compare that to the conversation he had with the guy who said he was a sheriff,
Mm-hmm.
who his line was, when N-words are scared, that's when white people are safe.
Yes.
Right? So you look at
Yes.
that white perspective of what it takes for a white person to feel safe, and then realize how Marquis has to disarm white people in order to make them feel safe so that he can be safe. That burden is entirely on him. And then you're like,
Yeah.
the letter makes sense. It's a survival technique.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think one of the things about the movie that I appreciated is that once it comes out that the letter is fake, Marquis is not judged for it at all. In fact, the characters who care about it, if anything, they're disappointed that it's not a real letter. Like, they don't hold it against Marquis. It's not like, they're like, "Oh, you lying son of a bitch." It's more just like, "Oh man." Like,
yeah. Well, the hangman was feelings were hurt.
Yeah, because
John,
he was especially enamored with it. Like, he was the one who asked to see it, which is how we learn about it while they're still in the coach riding to the roadhouse. He's the one who's
Daisy
like,
loved it. She's like, "Talk that sass." They thought the joke, the whole con was brilliant, and that the guy had fallen for it. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So it's I like it. It's sort of and at the end the sheriff character, who is the most notable racist in the cast, at least the most notable racist who makes it to the end of the movie. That wasn't
the general. Yeah, it wasn't the general. From the
because the general doesn't make it to the end. But he asks to read the letter toward the end, when he knows that it's a forgery, and he's almost sort of appreciative of it. You know what I mean? Like, he kind of chuckles. I think it's the last line spoken in the movie where he kind of is chuckling, and he appreciates everybody loves that. Here I think I hear old Mary Todd line.
Yeah, I guess it's time for bed.
Yeah, and he's like, "Oh, nice touch." Like, I think that's the last line of dialogue spoken in the movie, and so it's like he appreciates it, even though it's, there's an affection for the letter even when known to be a fake.
Did you read it as they survived? Because I know, like, Reservoir Dogs, they all die at the end, don't they?
I'm pretty sure they all die.
Yeah,
at the end,
I'm just trying to imagine a Tarantino movie where two people are bleeding out in a blizzard that's going to last at least 2 days who are going to live. I kind of read it as, this is their last moments of consciousness or whatever.
I don't think they make it. I don't think they make it. I mean, I think one of the things is that they reinforce the blizzard over and over again. They make
sound production on that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And listen to it in headphones, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are told, and shown repeatedly that, like, they can't get out. Like, they're snowed in here for at least a couple of days, and usually it's used as a way of sort of applying pressure to the other characters to say, like, or as a threat, like when Daisy is trying to sort of get the upper hand on them and saying, like, the rest of our gang is going to be here as soon as this blizzard melts, but the implication being, well, they can't get here yet because nobody can get in or out because of the blizzard, but you just wait. So I think at the end there, they're definitely dead. Like,
yes, they're goners.
The next person, the next carriage to stop by that roadhouse is going to get a nice surprise.
Oh my God!
Oh my fucking God!
Yeah, don't look down the well. I mean, even got to that part yet.
Jesus.
But on the idea of truth and lies,
yes.
So I think there's, Major Marquis is pretty much upfront. Although one could say his story about the general's son, was that truth, or was he embellishing? Was it completely a lie? Was he just trying to provoke him into the gunfight? I think those are all interesting questions without a definitive answer.
Yes.
And John Ruth was also upfront, and Daisy was upfront, but everybody else, and Obi, but the other characters, even the sheriff, you're not really sure he's the sheriff.
Right.
And so the whole idea of people having personas and these sort of games being played, and the chess, which there's literally a chessboard put in front of the fireplace, so again, not subtle, but obviously Tarantino was deliberate there. But on the second watching, it really does make it very rewatchable with knowledge of how things turn out, to see how people are actually operating now that you know what's going on.
Yeah, you realize you notice that things are setups that you didn't notice were setups the first time.
And also
Yeah.
think, yes, like the red jelly bean.
Yeah, that was the one that I noticed that the first time. I was sort of like, oh, so that's why there was that red jelly bean on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a little bit of what I was saying about, sometimes I wonder if his nonlinear storytelling is because like that was I'm a little ambivalent about it because even though I think the screenplay is really well constructed and I admire it on a technical level a lot, there are things in it because he does the nonlinear storytelling trick where he takes the beginning of the movie, or not he takes the earliest events in the timeline and kind of lifts them off of the front and drops them into the middle,
Yes.
and so that we see things that already happened but that we didn't know about until just now.
Changes the
And
context.
yeah, it definitely changes the context, and also provides a lot of sort of late movie exposition because you're like, gee, who is the guy hiding under the floor who just shot that guy? And like, oh, here's who he is,
Yes.
right? And part of that, I mean, it's a clever trick, but I wonder if that's all it is. Like there have been times with this movie and with some of other Tarantino's movies where I'm like, is that is like it makes it feel more complex than maybe it really is, because it's not really a mystery. It's just leaving out information and then giving it to us at a later time. You know what I mean? There are times when I kind of question that. I'm like, is he really doing anything all that great, or is he just, he's just intentionally telling the story out of order so that it feels like this, like so you can have that moment of, oh, but is it really earned if you just left it out until then? You know what I mean? I don't. Please,
I'll give you a counter argument,
please,
or at least a different perspective.
Yeah, sure.
When I think about it, so what is Tarantino doing? What is the purpose? And I think this is where you have to think about it as a script, and not as like the movie we experience, but right. How he is organizing information and when the audience knows it. And also I think rewatchability. I mean, he's read that and done that script how many times? He knows it inside and out. And so what you actually have is, yes, you have earlier events that are taken out so that the audience comes into the Minnie's haberdashery the first time caught up in the story. They're basically traveling with the carriage, and they're introduced to these characters for the first time. So their impressions of them are set based on the lies. And if your theme is truth and lies, you want to lie to your audience as soon as you can. Right?
That's a good point.
So on that track, you've got this track here. And then what he does very cleverly is he shows you the flashback, and then he goes back to the beginning where you joined the haberdashery scene, and he shows it to you again with everything you know. So it's like, here, now you know this shit. Remember this? This is what it all meant, right? But on the other hand, so he's doing that with the audience, but Samuel L. Jackson's character knows more than the audience. And so
because he suspects it from the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we relate to his suspicions, but we don't understand why. And then when we get the flashback, we also get the reveal of his exposition, but also the things that were tipping him off along the way. And so as a consequence, I think as an audience member on a rewatch, you get to put more connections together. And I think that's very gratifying as an experience to like, oh, that was that thing and this is where it comes in or whatever, putting the pieces together and solving the puzzle that he's built. So that would be a counterpoint.
I will say it was gratifying to see exactly how Samuel L. Jackson's character was right, because you assume that when he starts expressing doubts to Senor Bob in the stable, and you figure that's going somewhere. They're not just going to drop that. That's in there for a reason. So you expect it to come back, and you expect it. Especially as the movie goes on, you expect like, okay, not all of these people are who they appear to be. And when Samuel L. Jackson's character starts to put it all together, right before we get that flashback to what happened earlier, there's a satisfying
Mm-hmm.
feeling to that of like, oh, not just, aha, I was right, this isn't what it
Yeah.
appears to be, but to see exactly how it was, so
Yeah.
um
Sorry, I just want to jump in because I remembered, Tarantino actually messes with the audience way early on because in the first interactions in the carriage between John Ruth, Daisy, and Marquis, before John Ruth starts to get really paranoid and accuse everybody of being in on it with him, after she gets smacked, Daisy smiles at him
yeah,
like they're sharing a joke. And so you can even read it that way to have doubt that maybe he is in on it, from the start, because
right,
Tarantino is all about making you doubt people's stories and question whether or not you're hearing the truth.
yeah. Did you want to talk about Tarantino's use of himself as the narrator in this too?
Yeah, otherwise I was thinking a nice segue for this
Yeah.
might be the Silent Night scene.
Oh, okay.
Because I think it goes with the reliable narrator, and then we can go on to the structuring of the chapters.
Oh,
Because
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Which is
thematic.
another favorite technique of
Yes,
Tarantino.
Tarantino. Yes, and foreshadowing, using chapter titles as foreshadowing in
Oh,
this
big
case.
time.
Wow. So I've watched that scene, The Silent Night, where Senior Bob is repeatedly trying to play Silent Night, but obviously it is scored in such a deliberate way to emotionally interact with the dialogue that's being delivered between this racist ass general who massacred Union black soldiers, wouldn't take them to the prisoner of war camps,
Yeah.
and Samuel L. Jackson, who is about to relate, spoiler alert, that he killed his son.
Yeah.
And it is maybe that for me, that scene is so Tarantino.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the Pulp Fiction Ezekiel quote would also be up there, but this is like a slower version of it. This is like a waltz instead of, a faster foxtrot in that case.
Yeah.
It is masterfully crafted together, and it's horrific. It's like a horrific story. But on the other hand, you look back at the craft of it, at least I can just be like, there's so much depth and things to engage with here. It's so rich in terms of what is true, what is false. Was this justified violence? Yeah. So your thoughts
Yeah.
on that
Well,
scene?
I think it's the best scene in the movie. I think it's the highlight of the movie for me, and I think it's most Tarantino movies have that scene, which is like,
Somewhere, the confrontation.
yeah, yeah, and like, and where you can tell that Tarantino, and it's usually a long scene with a lot of extended dialogue, and in Pulp Fiction, it's Jules in the booth at the end with Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, which is where he delivers the most famous version of Ezekiel 25:17, where he explains what it means, and he says, "I've been saying that shit for years, and if you heard it, it meant your ass. But lately, I've been thinking, it's that scene, and
Yeah.
every scene almost every Tarantino movie has a version of that scene where it's just the virtuoso, like the writing and the directing,
Samuel L. Jackson.
Samuel L. Jackson doing something, and just the feeling of tension. It's usually quiet. There's no music. There's always sound design, but it's meant to sort of evoke like silence in between the words, and that's that scene in this movie is where you first that entire interaction between the general and Major Marquis leading up to the general getting killed that's the big showpiece for me in the movie, and that's
Yeah.
Tarantino saying, like, just in case you've forgotten what I can do, here's what I can do.
Exactly. Yes.
Um, and so I love it. And yeah, it does. You're right. Like, I'm not sure if Major Marquis's half of that story about what he did leading up to killing the general's son is true or not. I don't know. It could be true. It could be something that he is just making up because he knows it will provoke the general to pull his gun first, and he just wants to kill the general and be able to say that it was justified in front of all these people.
Yeah. All these white people.
Yeah, I don't think it matters whether it was true or not. I kind of hope it was true, because fuck that guy.
Yeah.
But I mean, but it doesn't matter. But that whole sequence is just totally a virtuoso sequence, and
Yeah.
it reminded me of the first scene in Inglorious Bastards, where Christoph Waltz's character is visiting like the people in the
Yeah.
cottage, and they're hiding people under the floor, and that's again, it's that scene just is such a long scene, and there's so much tension, and it's nothing but dialogue, and it's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah.
And I got the same kind of vibe from this scene in Hateful Eight, where it's just like it's just you know it's characters telling each other a story, basically,
Yeah. And
but
the
it's
thing. Oh,
so
sorry.
well done. Go ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking in that Inglorious Bastards opening scene
Yeah.
was just such an homage. It was just learning everything that Hitchcock told you
Oh boy.
about how to use suspense in a scene
Oh boy.
and how to use the knowledge of the audience to fuck with their heads and just fuck with their heads and know you're doing it and just ratchet it up. And then there's a release at some point. This is a slightly different though, because in this case the audience doesn't know what's real, but what
Yeah.
what the tension is between this grieving father who is a war criminal,
Yeah.
and this also man who engaged in racial violence but is also a target of racial violence his entire life, in this locked in this just completely captivating interaction, which you don't know what's going on, like how, because it starts off again Tarantino fucking with you. There was a whole thing with the Lincoln letter at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
The general had refused to eat at the table because he didn't want to eat with the black man, and after all that kind of kicks off, he Marquis walks over to the general and they sit down, and it starts to be like a Christmas miracle. They're talking quietly. He asks him about his wife and where they grew up, and it, like the tension that you just had from that Lincoln letter, right? He can't go to another fight. This is about the pacing, right? He
Right.
brings us down. He brings us down and calms thing again. Why? Not to relax us, just so he can start ratcheting the
Exactly.
back up. And that's like almost like a composer playing with the pacing of the orchestra in order to surprise the audience or draw them in. And this is why you just have to admire, like, again, problematic, but what he does is this is what writing can be.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
It's I think it's his best skill as a director. I think as a writer too, because obviously, as you pointed out, the writing has to be there first and foremost. It has to have the structure has to be in place, but he is so good at creating and maintaining tension,
Yeah.
which is a very basic skill for any filmmaker to have, and there are so many filmmakers who just can't do it, or at least can't do it to that level. The level that Tarantino does, where you can maintain that tension for so long in a single scene. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one thing to create and maintain tension over the course of a movie if there's like a suspense plot
24.
and yeah, exactly, where it's like
clock,
is
you're racing against the clock.
Exactly. Is the bomb going to go off? Are they going to get it in time? Are they going to find the kidnapped person? Whatever it is, like that's a different kind of tension that's also super important and can be super enjoyable, but to maintain it in a single scene that lasts for that long, and as you pointed out, to have it go up and down a few times, to bring it down and then to raise it back up, and the first time you watch it, to genuinely not know what's going to happen, because that you probably guess, okay, some of these characters aren't going to make it to the end. Right. Whenever, not just a Tarantino movie, in any movie where you get to a point in the movie where it's like, boy, yeah, and it's like, boy, there's like a lot of characters in this. They're okay. They're not. Eventually, there's going to be way fewer people here, right? You know that. So you get to this point where there's this really tense confrontation, this sort of battle of wills between these two guys, and that one of them is trying to provoke the other to make a move so that he can then make a move back, and you don't know what's going to happen there. It's like the quick draw in the gunfight.
It is classic quick draw in Western.
And you don't know who's going to win. I mean, okay, the hero is probably going to win, but you don't know, especially because it's a Tarantino movie, and especially because
heroes.
And it's an ensemble, and it's not like the movie. If it's you think, well, by this point we've gotten used to the fact that in this movie Samuel L. Jackson's character is a major character. But it's such an ensemble that it's not unthinkable that they would kill him off halfway through, so you don't really know. And And even when you watch it back the second time, even though when you know what the outcome is, you can appreciate what he's doing to create that tension and to maintain it. And it's just phenomenal.
It is really
It's
good.
the best. Like I say, it's the best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. It becomes almost hypnotic too with the silent night. And of course that jarring mishit of the chords right before he goes, the last, the day your son died was the day he met me. Pause. And then the song starts again as he starts telling. I mean, again, the timing of it and the sound production with the constant screeching wind in the background.
Yeah.
It's just mesmerizing.
And that particular buildup I love, because that's one of the things where I knew where it was going. You know what I mean? Like, as soon as the two of them start talking about the general's son, I was like, okay, I know what this is.
Shit.
It's like, I know, because they had already mentioned, that Marquis had they exactly. And so, that was not a surprise at all. As soon as that conversation started and you get a hint of where it's going, it's like, okay,
and he's already name dropped that these people have come up looking for the bounty and he's killed them all. Right?
Yeah.
So we just don't know how.
Right. So, but that's like another form of satisfaction, because it's like, where it's going. And when it gets there and it gets to where you expected it to go, which is that line where he says, the day your son died was the day he met me. That's where you expect it to get to. And that is satisfying, not because that's another skill that is really, really important for a writer or a storyteller of any kind to have, is to know when to fulfill an expectation and to know when to subvert an expectation. Yeah. You can't subvert you have to create expectations in the minds of your audience. You have to give them things to look forward to project as possibly going to happen later in your story. You can't subvert all their expectations. If you do that, then it just becomes annoying and the story falls apart and nothing means anything. You have to know which expectations to fulfill and which to give them something unexpected.
Yeah, it's like a little appetizer.
Yeah.
Like when to drop that. And in that scene too, because the audience knows Marquis's history and has put two and two together. When the scene of him saying was the day he met me is a two shot with Samuel L. Jackson. But then the reaction shot is from the front where the general is sat and he's standing over him. And your audience, to look to the general to see what his reaction is. Because it's not like a surprise to you.
Yeah.
So you're anticipating that, you cut to it and you want to see he's holding onto his hand and how does he pull away? And, so it's also like the combination of the exposition and the direction saying, oh, I know what the audience knows. So we're going to focus here. We're going to make, the general the center of the scene because his reaction now is what audience will want to see.
Yeah.
Just working on that level is, admirable. Like I just said, wow.
It's a fantastic scene. It's a fantastic scene. So Tarantino as his own narrator.
Yes. So yes, this is a common thing too. He likes to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, and put himself in.
He usually likes to put himself in, and the way he puts himself into this one is about halfway through the movie. There's a narrator.
Yeah,
and it's Quentin Tarantino.
Yep.
And yeah, I like this use of a narrator. I feel like there's it gives it a little bit of personality, and like with
Breckian alienation.
Well, yeah, and with Tarantino, you always sort of like whenever Tarantino does something like that is obviously, a little bit of a stylistic flourish, because it doesn't need a narrator.
No.
Right? We could, there are other ways to let us know what's going on. I mean, the narrator, when he comes in as the narrator, he's basically giving us exposition and letting us know what's in a character's head. And, so he doesn't need to do that. So the fact that he is using that particular technique, and the fact that he's Tarantino, and that he likes to reference things and he likes to sort of use old fashioned storytelling techniques from time to time, it sort of gives it an extra layer of like, oh, it's sort of Tarantino going, look, I'm using a narrator. See, I'm using a narrator, and I'm the narrator. Yes. And and it made me smile the first time that I watched it, because you're not necessarily expecting it, because it hasn't had a narrator up to this point.
Nope.
And it really doesn't have one after that.
Nope.
There's like a couple of minutes in the middle where he's narrating, and then it just goes away.
Yes. And the reason I kind of referenced Breckian alienation was I was thinking it's not really Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright has this aesthetic in his films. He kind of likes to hover over this line where it looks real, but you know it's a movie.
Yeah.
And that's, I think Hot Fuzz is probably the most perfect example of that. And in that, you know, the violence is so ridiculous and it's mostly against elderly people and nobody dies and it's also silly. It's over the top and everything. So you don't kind of expect verisimilitude. You're like, there's not like, oh, the historically accurate outfits or whatever.
Right.
And with this movie, I guess, you know, most of it is meant to be very much about a realism, an authenticity of the location, the garb, the way of speaking and in his way of understanding it and the levels of power in the society. But then he just kind of drops in and is like, hey, this is a movie.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, like, I'm going to give you some information because, you know, you're the audience and we were like watching and we're more godlike and watching what's happening. So here you go. And yeah, it kind of like takes you out of the movie, makes you recognize that you are watching a movie. Yeah. And again, very postmodern.
Absolutely. And which the chapter titles do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And you're right. There are times when that is the right move, you know, and the thing is, because the chapter titles are used from the beginning, and because I don't think we've mentioned it since we've been streaming, but we talked about it a little bit before we went on the air. The fact that once they get to the roadhouse, and it's basically the whole story from that point on takes place just in that single location. Yeah. It's very classical. It has a dramatic unity to it, where it's these characters they stay in a single place. And so that, especially if you're familiar with sort of dramatic theory, that is telling you that it's a movie. Like that, just the structure of it and the way that it's put together and the fact that it has such a unity to it, that is reminding you, this is a movie. This isn't real. This isn't supposed to be real. This is a movie. And so when the narrator comes in to really remind you of that, where it's literally the movie talking to you, the audience, saying, here's some things I think you should know before we go on with our story. Like, it doesn't feel as jarring as it otherwise might be.
Yeah, I agree.
If you just bring in a narrator halfway through the movie. And that's not been established already, you know, and the narrator is like a third person omniscient. It's not one of the characters telling you the story. It's a narrator who is not in the movie at all, you know, who is just, and
is the voice of God.
Yeah.
Tarantino
and like,
is God.
Yeah. And the added wrinkle that, you know, that it's literally the director of the movie. So, you know, yeah, I think it works really well. It actually, it's funny. After I watched this for the first time, I had kind of a Western weekend because I was in the movie.
Yeah, I saw you tweeted that.
So I watched the 2007 version of 3:10 to Yuma, which I had never seen, and I thought that was excellent. And then I watched The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which is a masterpiece. Like, I just absolutely loved it. And that uses a narrator. Sporadically, but throughout. There's narration at the beginning, there's narration here and there through it, and then there's narration at the end. And if it's used properly, it's incredibly effective because it makes things. The fact that it's reminding you that you're watching a movie, and it gives it kind of like a mythic quality. You know, and I feel like that it works a little bit to that effect in Hateful Eight, where it's like, you know, the director of the film is reaching beyond his narrative.
Yeah, it's like the chorus in Shakespeare. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So,
by the way, I've noticed like my cheeks are so rosy from my wine. I don't have blush on. This is completely wine blush going on here.
It's all natural.
Yes. Yes, so the use of the chapters to foreshadow or to point the audience attention in a certain, like, hey, this is what you want to watch out for this time. Yeah. And it's most powerfully used in Dahmer's Got a Secret chapter, obviously.
Which is also where the narration comes in.
Yes.
Where he says, where he basically reinforces what what the chapter title has already primed you for, which is, she saw something. Yes. And only she saw it. And it was really important, but I'm not going to show you what it was because that would spoil the surprise for later. But just know that there's a thing that happened.
Yes, there's another thing too, and we might get on to it a little bit with the technical, but you
Yeah.
mentioned about the space that they're in this haberdashery. It's
Yeah.
basically a single room. And one of the challenges I would imagine, because he had this massively wide lens, and one of the things I think they do pretty well is orient the viewer into where they are in the space of the room.
Oh, yes.
Like if you asked me to kind of map out Minnie's haberdashery, having never been there, I could do it.
Yeah.
And that at some point, like when the coffee gets poisoned, becomes a bit of an issue because, like, oh, who was on that side of the room? And you're, like, watching it the second time, I kind of looked for that setup with John Gage, allegedly, yeah, no, in that area. I'm thinking, okay, is that plausible that he could have gotten up off the bed and kind of snuck off when the whole Samuel L. Jackson drama thing was going on?
Right.
And I looked at it, I was like, oh, the coffee isn't by the kitchen. The coffee's on the stove by the door. And I was like, yeah, it works out. But just being mindful of that when you place your characters and thinking about where people are located. Like, for instance, one of the things that actually really did it, just made me laugh so hard, was the opening scene of Minnie's haberdashery. Because you see Tim Roth, and you see, I'm sorry, I don't know the actor's name who played the general.
Oh, Bruce Dern.
Right?
Yeah.
And you hear people are like shouting about the door. You've got to nail the door shut. But then you hear Michael Madsen off camera just fucking, you got to nail the fucking door. She's fucking broken.
You haven't even seen him yet. But yeah.
No. And it's just a cacophony of people yelling. And it's just ridiculous. It's just like I had to laugh because it was so silly to watch them. But then the second time it's shown, I know where he is in the room.
Yeah.
Relative to where the scene is being shot. And yeah, that's just like something maybe you aren't aware of as a viewer, but it's something the director always kind of has to keep in mind, is making sure the audience understands the space. Because I think they only go up one floor once when the sheriff has a bit of a drink to Georgia. They have a toast.
Yeah.
But everything else just on that ground level the whole time. So you're always working within that space.
Yeah, it's a little bit like it's not. I mean, it never really feels claustrophobic, but it reminds me of the way that 12 Angry Men is shot, because 12 Angry Men takes place almost entirely in the jury room.
Yeah,
and this space in Hateful Eight is a lot bigger than that, but still, once they're in there, they're in there. And we never really go out there, except maybe for some stuff in the stable or some stuff outside. Yeah. But for the most part, once everybody's there, they're there, and the movie takes place within those four walls. And the way that he is able to shoot, first of all, the way it's designed so that there are, even though it's one big room, that there are distinct places for people to go. And it feels like you can have different locations within that same single location. And then the way it's shot so that it never feels repetitive, it never feels boring. You never get the sense of like, oh, Jesus, are they still in this fucking room? Like it never feels that way.
Yeah.
It's really, really that the use of the space, the physical space is well done.
He had the entire cast watch the movie The Thing before they filmed.
That's a good reference. Yeah. That's a good reference.
And also stars?
It's Kurt Russell. I'm sure he was happy about that. Oh, you're gonna show The Thing, huh? All right.
Yeah.
I can dig it.
I'll watch that again.
I hear that's pretty good.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting blend again of I don't want to say modalities, but themes. You've got a Western, you've got a bit of a whodunit, you've got a bit of a horror movie, kind of like on the like parallels with The Thing, being trapped, there being an evil that you can't understand entirely around you. So it does, incorporate a lot of different genre tensions or references in that way.
Yeah. Which is something that Tarantino enjoys doing. I mean, I don't think it's, I am not one of those.
Is it like hip hop and sampling?
I think, I think it's kind of like that. I am someone who, I don't necessarily hold it against him that he I'll say emulates so many different styles. Because, there's sort of that old saying, good artists borrow, great artists steal. I mean, he's not the only filmmaker that does it. It's just he's a lot more obvious about it.
Yes,
than other filmmakers. I mean, every film
straight up.
Yeah, it's like you think Spielberg has never ripped off Hitchcock.
Yeah,
Spielberg rips off Hitchcock every movie he makes, but that's the way it goes. That's the game. You know what I mean? Like
Because
that,
once you
that,
see a shot like that, you want to recreate it, but you want to do
yeah,
it for your story and have a certain impact. But you want to use those techniques, because they
exactly.
work.
Because they work, and hopefully you put your own spin on it. You're
That's the
not
thing.
you're not just cribbing off somebody else's paper. And I don't think Tarantino does that. I think obviously his work is patterned off of particular
Mm-hmm.
genres or
And
particular,
influences.
yeah, particular influences. You know, he obviously loves exploitation movies from the 70s. He obviously loves martial arts movies from the 70s. He obviously loves like spaghetti westerns and things like he
Mm-hmm.
you can read his influences easily. They're right out there for everybody
Yeah.
to see. But he's not, you know, he's not copying Sergio Leone. He's taking that aesthetic
He's
and
doing a spin on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously he's, you know, he's taking something from someone else, but he's using it in his own way for his own purpose. And again, that's called writing. Like that's what you
Yeah.
do, you
Yeah.
know.
Shakespeare didn't come up with Romeo and Juliet. He
No,
adapted it from another
you
story.
you make it,
Like,
yeah, you make it your own.
yeah.
But
Hamlet too.
yeah, yeah, you know. So, but yeah, and it definitely is a mix of genres, you know. And that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the things. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about westerns is that for whatever reason, I mean, you can do this with pretty much any genre, but with westerns, for whatever reason, at least in American culture, that has become one of those genres that that storytellers have liked to mix with other genres. You know what I mean? Like it's much more common to have a western that is also a whodunit, or a western that is also a revenge movie, or a
Mm-hmm.
western that is also a road
A
movie,
space movie like Star
or
Wars.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yes, absolutely. Um, that's just it's just a lot more common to have that. So that in and of itself is also true to the genre that he is working in. It's like, well, of course it's not just cowboys ride into town and have a fight. There's
Yeah.
other stuff going on.
But on that,
Yeah.
oh, wait, sorry, I don't want to
No,
end.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, because there's a question for you, not me going on a tangent, which is westerns like Robin Hood are a bit of a mirror of the culture that they are situated in. So you get the Eisenhower version, John Wayne westerns
Oh
from
yes.
American independence, greatness, freedom, all that. And then you get the 1970s cynicism, Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So, like in 20 years, what do you think, or even now, what do you think does this western say about the American culture in which it's located compared to other eras of westerns?
That is interesting.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's because as we discussed earlier, Tarantino doesn't usually seem to be making any kind of a statement about what he is showing in his work. You know what I mean? Like his for as personal as it is, and for as accomplished as it is in many different ways, his work rarely, if ever, feels editorial.
True, but it is located within the zeitgeist.
It is. It is. It
Yeah.
is. And I think his knack for deconstruction, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is something that will probably be noted. I think that's one of the aspects of modern westerns, really, since in a sense you could say since the 70s, but really since the 90s, especially when Clint Eastwood made Unforgiven. I feel like a hallmark of more modern westerns, including this one, has been deconstruction
Mm-hmm.
and sort of taking it apart and showing us what the inside of the machine looks like, and then putting it back together in an interesting way. So I think the idea of it being a postmodern western, of it being using the trappings of a western, but also combining it with a classical sort of unity drama and a little bit of mystery and whodunit. Like I think that maybe marks it as a product of the current time. Because we like to take things. We're I, it's probably not as bad as it feels, because we're in the middle of it and it's difficult to find perspective. But it feels like we're dependent on, and not just in this movie, but in our popular art in general right now. It feels like we're really dependent on references to other things. were really preoccupied with doing new versions of things that were done before.
Mm.
I mean, literally, not just inspiration,
Remakes.
but like remakes
Literal
and
live
yeah,
action versions of films that were fine when they were
yeah,
animated.
yeah, and yeah, those are the most obvious
Yeah.
examples where yeah, Disney is literally just saying we're going to make the same movie
We have no
again.
original ideas. We give up.
But that's you know there's that's been a major theme in especially mainstream film and television, but I think popular art in general, like doing things over, or
Mm.
bringing back old stuff to give us more of it. You know, like reviving old TV shows, or you know, like in doing a new season, doing a new Star Trek series, and bringing Patrick Stewart back to play Captain Picard again after 20 years. Bringing back, I think they're bringing back Frasier. You know,
Oh God.
They brought back Mad About You, and you know, like
Yeah, the dross. The dross.
yeah, like
Yeah.
just bringing back, you know, like shows
Yeah.
that people our age remember from 20, 30
Right.
years ago, and saying, oh, but all those people are still alive, let's bring them back and do another one. And you know, plus all the remakes and reboots and
Yeah.
reimaginings and belated sequels and all this stuff, like it feels like that's a defining trait of the zeitgeist at the moment. And even though Hateful Eight is a completely original movie, you know, the fact that it does make so many references to past things, and the fact that it is sort of a deconstruction and a way of saying, you know, let's take this old thing and let's look at it through modern eyes and do it again. I feel
Mm.
like that maybe is what people will you know note about it in the in the future. But I wonder also if it might be discussed more often as a Tarantino film than as a Western. You know what I mean?
Possibly.
Because like when because like I mean as I said, like I think I probably enjoy this the least of Tarantino's films, but I still find a lot about it to admire. And you know, and I thought Django Unchained was really good too, and that was also a Western that Tarantino made. But I think of them
I had a
more,
much harder time with Django Unchained personally.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, it was more difficult for me. But
But
anyway, so
but I think that like I tend to think of them first as Tarantino movies and second as
as
Westerns.
whatever genre, like
Yeah.
Kill Bill, it's a Tarantino
Yeah.
movie, not a
Yeah,
martial arts film.
that's an even better example. Yeah, it's like I don't really I think of that as a Tarantino film, and I think of it like as Tarantino riffing on a martial arts film.
Right. Yeah, but it's a Tarantino movie.
But I don't think of it as a martial arts film, even though I mean it is. And so I think it might be thought of in that way, because if you were to ask me, you know, like what are some of your favorite Westerns from the last 10 years, it's not that like this movie or Django wouldn't be good enough to make the list. It just might not even occur to me to put them on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
because
because
they have a category of their own.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you think, I mean, I don't know the genre of Westerns that much. It's not a genre that I really got into. Also,
Right.
like my dad liked to watch a lot of Westerns and they really seem boring because a lot of landscape shots and you're like 7, you're like, I'm looking at dirt. I see this every day. I look out my window. I don't need to watch it on TV.
Give it a rest, John Ford. I get it. The desert is pretty. God damn it.
Yeah. But it does seem to me that for its various flaws, which we have pointed out and are completely valid to criticize,
Sure.
it does deal with the issue of white supremacy in that era with the most honesty I think I've ever seen. And it's not resolved. The white people don't redeem themselves.
No.
They die racists. They
Yeah.
die shitty racist people. And I don't know if is there another Western, I'm going to finish my wine now, that addresses the issue of racism in that time period as directly or even without making the white people the heroes and redeemed by the end of it.
Not that I can think of. No, not that I can think of. You know, one I mentioned it a second ago. One of my favorite Westerns ever is Unforgiven, and the racism in Unforgiven is never explicit, but one of the major characters in Unforgiven is played by Morgan Freeman, who is the only major black character in the movie. And spoiler alert for like a 30-year-old movie, his character dies,
Yep.
and you know, and it's never explicitly said that racism is a factor in his death, but it's sort of there. You can sort of put the dots together and think, well, he's the horrible, abusive, evil white sheriff killed the only black guy in the movie. I wonder if there was any racism involved.
Yeah.
But that act is, you know, what you were saying about like that act is sort of redeemed by the white characters. Like the
Mm-hmm.
Clint Eastwood's character is the hero, and he's the white guy who comes in to avenge his black friend's death.
Yep.
And it's sort of made good in that way. And yeah, you're right. That doesn't happen in Hateful Eight. Like
Nope.
there's no redemption for anybody.
The racism just was.
Yeah,
Like it was, it still
yeah,
is. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And again, like if we're going to make an argument for why there are so many N words flying around, I don't think that using that word that often is necessary for what Tarantino does, but it is a part of what he's doing, which is, these characters exist in an extremely racist world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fact of life. It's as much a part of their everyday experience as the sky and the grass and
Yep.
the air that they breathe. And as you point out in this movie especially, like there's no solution to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like
No,
it
no.
just it
There's
just
no
is.
redemption.
It just is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end, you basically get a Confederate character and a black guy who, as you said, they come to a level of respect, but there's no apologies. There's no, like they have mutually aligned goals, and
Yeah.
they realize that they have some things in common. But it's not like anyone is like the white character doesn't go, oh, all my racist ways. Oh, the Confederates. No, that never happened.
Exactly. They reach kind of an unspoken understanding, and the main reason that they do that they get to that point is because they agree that there's this other thing that threatens them
Mm-hmm.
more than they threaten
Yes.
each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the reason why they end up working together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and again, when it comes to the N word and gratuitousness, I think like my gratuitous for N words is down here, and Tarantino's is like it's off my screen. Like what
God,
he thinks is gratuitous is like I'm already maxed out.
well, and I know because what the example that a lot of people used before Django was Jackie Brown, and people like to point out Jackie Brown is an adaptation. It's adapted from an Elmore Leonard novel. That does not include a single use of the N word.
And he threw them in. Oh,
And
gosh, I didn't know
Tarantino,
that.
yeah, and
I didn't know
Tarantino,
that.
yeah, and it was funny because like I remember, and again, Jackie Brown is one of my favorite of his movies. I think Jackie Brown is fantastic, but I remember when the movie came out, Tarantino was being interviewed about it, and they were talking to him about the fact that it was an adaptation of an Elmore Leonard novel. It wasn't his original story, and he said, in an interview, he said about half of the dialogue in the movie is taken more or less verbatim from the book, and about half of it is mine. And one of the proudest things for me as a writer is that you can't tell which is which. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh, I bet there's one way you can tell, Quentin. There's certain lines that you can tell for a fact are yours because that word ain't in the book.
Oh no, we know. We know.
But, yeah, we can tell. Oh, Quentin, we can tell. But so the fact that like there are ways of dealing with these themes and telling these stories. But I think the problem is the assumption that a lot of people made was because a lot of the characters in Jackie Brown are black.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not positive, but I think most of the N-words that are said in the movie are said by black characters. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's probably the case in Jackie Brown.
Or at least a majority, probably some
yeah,
white people say it, but
yeah, I'm positive that at least a couple white people say it at some point.
yeah, it's a Tarantino movie.
But it's a Tarantino movie. But most of the characters saying the word are black, and I feel like I picture Tarantino as being like a kid in a candy store. Of being like, oh, I'm writing a movie about mostly black characters so they can say it all they want. You know what I mean? And it's like, to him, it's his characters saying it, not him as the writer saying it. So he's like, well, black people are saying it to each other. That's how some black people talk. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Clinton.
I know. I've seen more interviews of Samuel L. Jackson addressing the issue of the N-word in Tarantino movies than I've seen Tarantino addressing that issue.
Yeah.
And that's like a super unfair burden to place on the actors who are doing their jobs. They're not going to argue with the director or the scriptwriter. They don't have the power to do that. But I just like it frustrates me. That did frustrate me. That like, why are people keep asking Samuel L. Jackson about something Quentin Tarantino does?
Are you thinking of the one where he got into an argument with the interviewer because the interviewer I think the interviewer was trying to talk about it without talking about it. He was trying to sort
Oh,
of be evasive, and he
yeah.
said I think I don't know if he even said the N word. He just said like a particular word, and I think we all know what word I'm talking about. And Samuel L. Jackson, I guess maybe he was tired of having done all these interviews, and or tired of being asked about it. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, "What word are you? What word do you mean? What word are you talking about?" And the interviewer said, and I think at that, yeah, and I think at that point he said, well, the N word. And Samuel L. Jackson is like, well, say the word. What word are you talking about? Say the word. And the interviewer said, I'm not going to say it. You can say it if you want. And Samuel L. Jackson said, I'm not going to say it. Like, if you want to talk about it, you say it. And they just get into this ridiculous back and forth. And it's, yeah, you're right. Like Samuel L. Jackson didn't write the script.
Nope.
And if you want to jump on somebody's ass about it, jump on Quentin Tarantino's ass about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
just when I did, because I was
Yeah.
watching some people's reviews, there's not a lot of good discussions about, there's not a lot of good analyses. There are some of, like, Pulp Fiction, there are a ton on YouTube. But there weren't, it was kind of shallow. And so I went into interviews and panels and things like that. And I looked up, like, Tarantino N-word in Google, or sorry, in YouTube.
Yeah.
And I came up with, like, all these results with Samuel L. Jackson first. I'm like, what is this shit? What is this pass in the buck white privilege? Ask Tarantino if you have that question. And so I just want to point that out because it kind of demonstrates, like, the burden and privilege, because Tarantino could just like, I'm not going to talk about it, and have his little strut. But then people are like, oh, the black man, let's ask his opinion, because they didn't ask the other white characters,
right. Yeah, they never asked John Travolta about it. Of course, I don't know if Travolta's ever actually said it in the movie, but
it's in the movie.
He's in the movie, yeah.
Yeah, Tarantino said it in front of him.
That's right. Yeah, Tarantino not only wrote it, Tarantino said it.
Yeah,
and said it multiple times.
Mm-hmm. But he doesn't get asked.
No, I mean it's a pain, but yeah. So yeah, I mean overall, like I say, it's not my favorite Tarantino movie, but there's so much about it to appreciate and admire, and like we were saying, that especially that what you call the Silent Night scene, that whole sequence that leads up to the shooting of the general, is just, I mean, that one scene is like that. If anybody wants to know, like, what is the big fucking deal with Quentin Tarantino? Why is he so great? Show them that one scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe they still won't like it, but like that's that's as good as it gets, like if you can appreciate that, then you can understand why people appreciate his work.
Yeah,
for sure.
And the technical side, his use of, I noticed he was using the split lenses, so he could have two characters in focus at the same time near the end, when the general, the major, was on the other side of the room and the sheriff was up closer, and just using it. What is it, like 70 milliliter?
I think it was shot in 70 millimeter. Yeah, I think And boy, even, that's
Yes. And normally those are saved for, like, IMAX landscapes going over, like, the Colorado mountains so that you can see individual trees, right? He's using it to film in a room. But as a consequence, he can get, because it's super, what do they call it? It's like high, whatever it is. It's got extra black bars. Like, even if you watched it in a letterbox thing, you're going to see black bars because it's just like a strip, like a panoramic thing. And as a consequence, because he's working in that rather confined space of one room, again, this comes back to not feeling claustrophobic or whatever else. You've got, like, the entire, like, the length of the freaking room, if you want, for some of those shots. And his ability to kind of use that. I think he couldn't do certain techniques with those cameras that he likes to do, like just a slow push in on things. And so there were some technical tropes that he would rely on that he couldn't use as well, or maybe he had to do them in post and not with the camera itself. But as a consequence, there's a lot of steadiness to it, and fixedness, and that's not shaky camera, it's in that way. The sound design, I've gone over and over about just how great the sound of the noises are, even when they're talking. It's subconsciously, if you listen when they're in the carriage and the guy who claims he's a sheriff is describing the story of when the Confederate camp, his prisoner of war camp, was burned down by Marquis.
Yeah.
You could hear flames and screams in the back of the snow, in the back of the storm.
Yeah.
And then the soundtrack was done. The guy got an Oscar for it, but he had done the music on like a famous spaghetti western, I think, which is
Oh,
why.
it's Ennio Morricone who did the score.
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot
Yeah.
about that. Oh my god,
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
one of the great legendary composers in cinema, and yeah, it did the music for Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, wah 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 wah
Yeah.
wah wah. That's the guy who scored Hateful Eight, and
Yes.
yeah,
And got his Oscar for that.
yeah,
But it was probably more like a lifetime achievement award.
yeah.
I got a
Because come on,
feeling
he should have got it for Good, the
way
Bad, the
back.
Ugly. Like I don't know what won Best Score that year, but it wasn't
it
as
shouldn't have. It shouldn't have
it wasn't as good as the score
been.
for Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. For God's sake.
Yeah.
Um,
The only thing I didn't like about the score was just because it was a bit jarring was when they were laying out the markers to get to the outhouse.
yeah,
There's this sort of really dissonant sound music that's being played, and I guess it's meant to represent like the chaos of the storm and the
yeah.
stress of the storm. But the way it cuts, the cut is not smooth at all. It's almost like, I don't know if it was deliberately jarring, but it cuts then to Tim Roth inside in complete silence. But it ends
Yeah,
almost mid note. It doesn't feel like, maybe it's continuing outside and you're just pulled back into the room. But yeah, that was like the only thing that kind of took me out of the movie and went, what the fuck was that?
it's a little
What?
jarring.
That was, yeah. Why'd you do that?
Yeah,
But otherwise, it was great. Yeah. So overall, I think it will stand the test of time pretty well. This movie, even
yeah.
if you didn't enjoy it, like you said, there's a lot of mastery that went into it.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I mean, saying that it's underwhelming for a Tarantino movie, it's still better than 90% of
Yeah.
anything. I mean, like, because the Tarantino movies that I really, really enjoy, I tend to rate extremely high. I mean, like, I think Pulp Fiction is one of my favorite movies ever. You
Mm.
know, Jackie Brown isn't quite that high, but it's still pretty high. It's a great movie. I mean, I love so many. I love Robert Forster in it. I love Michael Keaton in it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Pam Grier is like that's like sort of the capstone of her whole career. And that's another thing that Tarantino, you know,
He
you
does too.
take like under because Pam Grier was known and was a star from the 70s, but she never really got a chance to actually show that she could fucking act.
Hmm.
And Tarantino makes this movie with her as the star, and she's just brilliant. I mean, she's just brilliant in it. And it's like, oh, she was this good of an actor all along,
Yeah.
and she never really got cast in roles that
Black
she
in
could act.
Hollywood.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Um,
You know,
but
Michael
yeah,
Keaton played the same character in that film as he did in Out of Sight,
yes, yes,
which I just love that little
because that's all
tidbit.
because that's also an Elmore Leonard adaptation.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So he's like one of the few people to have actually played the same character in two completely different movies. That
completely
wasn't
different
like,
adaptations. Yeah,
yeah, that wasn't like a sequel or something, carry
yeah,
on. Yeah.
and that's another one. Michael Keaton is another one where it's like, oh, don't forget he can act.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I mean,
because like, oh, he's
yeah, I
so good in
didn't
that.
like anyone in Birdman, but Birdman just floored me. Just
Yeah,
completely floored me.
Mike. Yeah.
Before I was going to ask you about the last
Put-
scene in one of the Loki things, but we'll do that at the very end.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
this. Oh, I got so excited about it.
I was like, I didn't think Michael Keaton was in Loki.
No.
If he was, I would have liked it a lot better. I'm like, oh, Michael Keaton, no shit.
Oh,
I thought he was Batman again, but Marvel got him back. Uh, but yeah, so I mean, yeah, for me, a slightly below average Tarantino movie is still pretty goddamn
Hi.
good. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, just for even if you really have serious problems with him, even if you don't like his movies, um, he is just on a technical level, he's
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, and is versatile because, as you pointed out, stylistically, especially visually, this movie is different than a lot of his other work.
Hmm.
You know, the camera's not nearly as active. There are a lot more static camera setups. There,
Hmm.
early in his career, the word that everybody used for him was kinetic. He's such a kinetic filmmaker, and he can be, and he often is. But this movie, not so much. This movie
Nope.
is a lot. There's a lot more stillness in this one, and the
Mhm.
violence that happens sort of in front of the camera, often
Yes.
in a static shot. You just sort of you're just sort of sitting there watching it, and it's not explosive and propulsive. It's very frank and matter of fact, and that works too. It's a
Mhm.
very different effect, but he knows how to wield it, and so yeah, just on a purely technical level, he's a brilliant filmmaker.
Yeah. Just
And
like,
I feel like you
oh.
have to appreciate that, even if you think he's a son of a bitch.
Yeah, you
You know?
can't take that away from him, right? Like
Not at all. Yeah.
he knows how to do what he does. You might
Yeah.
not like it or enjoy it, you might critique it, but you can't deny his skills.
Yeah. Yeah. A problematic and a problematic genius.
Yes,
Yeah.
as unfortunately so many of them are.
So many of them are.
Mm.
God. Well, that was what I remember, like a couple years ago when James Gunn was temporarily fired
Oh
from
yeah, yeah.
from
He got put on
Disney.
the naughty step.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I get like the things that they were upset at him for, like even though a lot of it was trumped up and it was just people trying to get him fired to for stuff that he had already apologized for like years and years ago that
Yes.
that didn't currently reflect who he was. But still, the stuff that, I mean, it was bad stuff, no question about it. But one of my thoughts was, I mean, Tarantino has been making movies all along.
Yes. He's
Like,
been doing this stuff for ages.
like we let him he could say whatever he wants, and everybody's like,
Mhm.
when's your next movie, Quentin? James Gunn fucked up a couple times 20 years ago and he loses his job. Like, it
Yeah.
just doesn't seem right. Especially
Fair
since, unlike Tarantino, James Gunn has actually been contrite about it and has tried to move on and grow as a person. And I don't see any evidence that Quentin has ever actually grown as a person.
Fair.
But whatever, you know.
Oh, this was as good as I hoped it was going to be.
Oh, I thought, I knew it was going to be good.
Yes,
I knew it was going to be good. Yeah.
I always enjoy talking with you.
Yeah. So yeah, what about the last episode of Loki?
Oh, it wasn't the last episode.
Oh,
so
the
if
next
you,
one
if,
of the
if,
last episode.
Yeah, well, it's actually much earlier. It's when they're on
okay.
Lamentis.
Oh,
so if
okay.
you don't want to know about anything to do with Loki, dip out.
Yeah, yeah. Loki spoilers.
Yep, I've warned you. So if you haven't seen it, get away. You've seen the series.
I have, yes.
Okay. What made my jaw drop, and it didn't hit me until about halfway through it, is when Loki and Sylvie are on Lamentis 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the last 3 and change minutes of the film. Yeah. I don't know if they're going through the audience or the crowd and they're trying to fight off the guards and everything else. I watched that about a minute and a half in. I'm like, I haven't seen a cut.
Yeah.
Now there are cuts, but they're hidden.
Yeah.
And it looks contiguous. And I was just like, think about, from the moment they start that, they had to block it out in so many segments, right? So that space that they were working at, you had the characters who had to move at a certain pace with the camera, hit their marks, wait in character for the camera to move into the next position, have something happen, have them go and hit their next mark. And then, you know, it's just like, I guess probably like 1917, that movie without...
Oh, yeah, where it's styled as one continuous shot. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, obviously that's pushed the boundaries incredibly on that. And now I know, they've switched up to a CGI image entirely. That's a cut.
Yeah.
So but I was like going, where are the cuts? That's a cut. Okay, where's the next one next? But honestly, just the blocking on that and the timing of it, the rehearsals, the getting all the extras to do it, I was like, this is blockbuster level cinematic directing on my little Disney box here. And the line between television entertainment and movie entertainment is increasingly blurred.
I think that I agree with you. That I think that's a fantastic shot. And one of my favorite things to see in a movie, and now a TV show, because TV shows are increasingly being more bold, sophisticated in their production, and it's more stylistically bold for sure. I love a good long continuous shot. Like, I'm just a sucker for
I know.
Yeah, when it's like I one of my favorite filmmakers is Paul Thomas Anderson, and he likes to do that, to do like really, really long takes where the camera is moving through different locations, and you have to the timing has to be just right. And that's a great shot. And it was weird. I remember reading I think it was the AV Club review of that episode. And the reviewer, I can't remember who reviewed it for the AV Club, but I think they actually liked the entire series more than I did, but they were weirdly critical of that shot. Like, they said they were kind of dismissive of it. They said something like, well, it looks cool until you realize that it's just the actors running around in front of a green screen. And I was like, fuck you. That's who, first of all, if they did shoot a lot of it in front of a green screen, who cares? It works. It doesn't feel like, I mean, I get criticizing, like like the Star Wars prequels, where so much of it was shot in front of a green screen, and like
Mhm.
it's really flat, and you can kind of
Yes.
it feels like they're giving a weather report a lot of the time because it's just not very dynamically shot.
Dynamic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in that Loki scene, it's like, yeah, okay, a lot of it is probably them in front of a green screen, but the camera moves and the timing and the choreography, like that's all real. And
Yes.
and then it's when it's blended with those CG elements, and it does have those hidden cuts, like it's done so well and so
Yes.
seamlessly and so artfully. I don't see how it's fair to just dismiss it as like, oh yeah, it's cool, but they were just running around in front of a green screen. It's like, no,
Like,
dude, they weren't. I
go
don't
to
know
film
how.
school.
I don't know how long that took. I don't
Oh,
know. I
think
don't know
about
what.
that.
Yeah, I don't know what the
How long?
production was like, but I mean, I would imagine it took a couple of days to get that one shot. I would guess. I don't know for a fact, but I would, just watching it and seeing how intricate it was, I would expect they
Mhm.
worked on that one shot for a couple of days. Um,
Choreography, sure. And all the
yeah,
extras choreography and the explosions going off. Because some of that
yeah,
was practical. It wasn't all CGI explosions going on. There was like
no,
dust and shit, right?
yeah, it was a fantastic shot. It was a fantastic shot, and it was good enough that it kind of made me a little bit less annoyed at the fact that I felt like that episode ended in the middle instead of ending at the
Oh,
end. That was one of that episode, as good as that shot is, that episode is one of the points where I started to kind of worry about the show, the overall series, because it's like, oh, that's the end of the episode. Like that's okay. And then like it just from that point on, it started to me, it started
mhm.
to feel like it was sort of running in place, like, it was sort of treading water. And then when we got to I feel like the last episode made up for it a little bit,
Mm.
although I do feel like it's weird for Loki and Sylvie to be so sidelined in the last episode of their show. But but
Fair
like, yeah,
enough.
like I liked the Loki series,
Mhm.
but I didn't like it nearly as much as a lot of people did, and I thought that of the three that they have released so far, it was my number three.
Okay.
I liked WandaVision and Falcon and Winter
Okay.
Soldier both a lot
Better.
better than I liked Loki.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I think my
but yeah, that shot is
yeah.
fantastic.
Yes, I mean it's not. It takes kind of a lot for me to pay more like to notice the direction, unless it's like really bad, you know. But
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
good directors, you don't necessarily consciously notice what they're doing unless you're looking for it. Like, oh, I'm going to do a review of this,
Right.
right? But as I said, I just like in the middle of it, I was like, when was the last time this scene was cut? Like, you know, and it took me out of it. But at the same time, I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
My feelings, I'm enjoying Loki. I just kind of consider it popcorn fare. So
Yeah.
if I have a good time, I Owen Wilson. It's not Luke, it's Owen, right?
It's Owen. Yeah.
Oh my god, he's wonderful in that.
Yeah.
And what I
Oh
guess
yeah.
I like narratively about it, maybe this is what I'm feeling is more redeeming is they finally kind of put Loki up against someone who's smarter than him as a
Hmm.
character. And that I felt was just a wonderful way to explore because his character is never really he's always had contempt for
Yeah.
everyone he's interacted with or a little bit of affection but a lot of contempt, and so to take his character and put it like a fish out of water, not just a new place but also with it's not really a nemesis, they end up becoming friends but an
Yeah.
equal. And
Yeah.
so I enjoyed that character exploration, and also just like, oh god, Owen, his just delivery, he's so folksy and nice, and
Oh, he's so good.
he's so good.
He's so good.
He's so good in it, yeah. So I really warmed to him. So like at the one point where he got put into the end of time, I was actually more upset. I was like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna watch Loki if he's dead. That's it. Like I
I'm
am
not.
heartbroken. He was my favorite character. I mean, I would like get
Yeah.
under Tom Hiddleston and trip him up as soon as I could, right? But in terms of like having a hug, I just want to hug.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, they they set things up for his character that they don't really pay off by the end of this season, which annoyed me a little bit. But
Mhm.
the fact that they are at least, I mean, he has a little bit of a character arc because he
Yeah.
realizes that things aren't the way he believed them to be, and
Mm-hmm.
he kind of has to deal with that. And but yeah, I mean, I think he's fantastic, and Hiddleston is great, obviously, and I do like the fact that they are moving Loki forward as a character. Um, because really, I mean, he's had a character arc throughout the Thor movies where him and Thor have sort of gone from being
Yes,
enemies to sort of being closer together,
brother
accepting each
relationship.
other. Yeah, and
Mhm.
so it's not like it's completely out of the blue where it's like, oh, all of a sudden Loki's a good guy now. Like he's been
Yeah.
on that track all along, but he moves a lot of distance in the series, especially if you care about the fact that this version of Loki is from the first Avengers movie and he doesn't have all the character development of the version that gets killed off in Endgame or Infinity
Yeah, yeah,
War.
yeah. Infinity
But
War.
still, the character has been developed in one form or another, previously. So it's not that big of a deal. But still, he does, he gets a lot of character development in a relatively short time. But I think it works, and I think it's necessary to do that if you want to keep bringing him back
Yeah.
and not have it feel like, oh, here comes, we have to have Loki in it because people want to see Loki. If there's actually a reason to keep telling stories about this character because he continues to grow and change.
In some ways, I feel like Owen Wilson's character, who keeps in the early, I think is it the second episode or maybe even the first, where he's asking like, "Why do you hurt people? Do you enjoy this?" In some ways, he's playing the character of the audience
Yes.
because Loki was a shitbag, right? But we want to like Loki.
Yeah.
So I think they kind of just like, yeah, put it in the narrative, confront him, make him confront this. Let's have an honest conversation about his motivations because it's a good story. And they had that, they dedicated time to that. And I really think that that was the right way to do it, as opposed to glossing over it in some way.
Oh,
It
for
was like a
sure.
nice bit of tension there between the two characters, drama, conflict.
Well, it's taking a risk, because, and I think it's a necessary risk if they want to have a series where Loki is the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do this, but it's a risk whenever you take a character that became popular because he was a villain, and then you make him into a hero, or at least a less villainous character.
Yes.
You risk losing what made that character appealing in the first place. One of my, for better or for worse, one of my constant points of reference is professional wrestling, and it has happened many times where a wrestler gets super popular with the fans as a bad guy, so they turn him babyface and he becomes a good guy, and he loses all of his appeal because
Mm-hmm.
people liked him because he was a badass, because he didn't take shit from people, because he was a cheater, because he did what he had to do to win. And now all of a sudden he's slapping hands and kissing babies, and it's like it's
Yeah.
not the same guy. And if you do that to Loki, it's like, well, wait a minute. He's not the same guy. We don't like him
Mm-hmm.
anymore because he's not the same guy. But I feel like the way they handled it in the series was to show us Loki actually what seems like him actually being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think
He
that
can't use
is,
his powers. He can't draw on the
yeah.
Tesseract. He's
And
got nothing.
and when he's reflecting on his own actions, he seems sincere, at least most of the time. It doesn't seem like
Mm-hmm.
he's running a game to trying to convince Mobius of something, or to try to, deceive Sylvie in some way. Like when he's being reflective of his own crimes, and, why does he do what he does? Why does he hurt people? Why is he the way he is? He feels like he's being honestly reflective and vulnerable and earnest. And when you can do that and actually pull it off, and I think Tom Hiddleston is obviously a good enough actor to pull that off, that works really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way that they can get us to a place where maybe Loki will end up being a different person than he was when we first fell in love with him as a character. But that's okay. We'll still accept it
Mm-hmm.
because we've gone on a journey with him, and we've seen that he's actually, we've seen him change,
In ways that are important for us to be able to like him, but not so much that we don't recognize him. I
Yeah,
remember
exactly.
Hugh Laurie reflecting on like House's character,
Mm-hmm.
and just the fact that, like, although the character of House did change a bit over the course of the season or the series,
Yeah.
House really doesn't change.
Not that
People
much. No.
change around him, but
Yeah.
the things, but if he had become likable, he wouldn't be House anymore. So we wouldn't have the thing that we'd like about him, which is he's a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that is really important, that if there is a kind of an edge to a character, it has to come out and remind you, like, they can not be evil and still be a kind of a jerk to people, and there's a tolerance there. There's like a level of what people will expect. But yeah, I mean, I just thought it was very intelligently done. Obviously,
Yeah.
for the bi community, it was great to see some
Oh, absolutely.
representation in Marvel, which is
Absolutely.
true to the character as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of I mean, I enjoyed it. It's worth my Disney
They're
subscription, I guess.
they're still inching bit by bit into actual representation on screen.
Yes.
They're easing into it. They're
Yeah.
like, we don't want we don't want all the moms with Winnie the Pooh shirts to get mad, so we have to sneak it in so that they don't even realize it's happening.
Yes.
I feel like that's that.
Baby's food.
Yeah. I feel like that reluctance is, or that's why, like they resisted something like in the new Star Wars movies, like having Finn and Poe get together as a character, even though there was a very large, very vocal segment of the fan base that wanted that to happen. And they sort of made a point in the last movie to say, no, they like girls. Because I think right, and I don't agree with it necessarily, but I think there is that fear of, they're going to piss off all the Winnie the Pooh shirt wearing moms, and all the, you know what I mean, and all the people who will uh, not accept it. But if they can sneak it in bit by bit, and that's incredibly frustrating for people who feel rightly, and I agree with them, that kind of representation is way, way, way overdue. And who gives a shit what the homophobic people in the audience think?
Yeah.
But
true
that's
to the characters, but Disney being bottom line. Yeah.
Exactly.
We have to be acceptable. We don't want to be like the next whatever. I guess Chick-fil-A was a different direction, but anyway, that was it. So I was just like kind of really excited about that crossover, that blurring of the line between television and cinematic directorial freedom that people are being given these days. It's very exciting.
It is really cool. I've noticed that's one of my favorite things about the newer Star Trek shows, is that and one of the things I say in their defense, because there is a segment of the Star Trek fan base that has been really, really reluctant to embrace the new shows. And one of the main reasons, I think, is because they're a lot different than what.
Are you talking about Enterprise on Netflix, or is there some?
Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard are the two main ones.
Okay, Discovery. Sorry, the one, is that the one with the protagonist who's the Michael?
Yes, Michael Burnham. Yeah, played by Sonequa Martin Green. Yeah,
love that.
And she's terrific. And I mean, it's grown into, I think, a pretty good show. And but one of the
definitely
things
has a more cinematic feel.
Very much, and that's one of the things I point out to people, is to say, like, and obviously you can always argue, and everything's a matter of taste. But to me, it seems only fair to acknowledge that whether you like the show or not, whether it connects with you, or emotionally or not. It's the best made.
Beautiful.
It's the best made Star Trek show ever.
Beautiful.
It's the design, it's so well directed. I mean, as much as I love the old Star Trek shows, but they were directed like TV shows. And for the most part, like what's a memorable shot in a Star Trek show?
Yeah,
like,
you get the
nothing.
box. You get the box and you swing it this way, you swing it up and down, or whatever. You bring it. That's it. That's
exactly.
it. You're living in a box.
You're shooting for coverage, and you're
Yes.
But Discovery and Picard to an extent, they're not like that. They're shot like movies, and they look like movies, and they feel like movies, and you feel like the directors of them are given a little bit more freedom and license, to shoot things more cinematically, and it looks fantastic. And even if you don't think it's a good show, I think it's only fair to point out this is the best looking Star Trek that's ever been made. And it's the same thing you're talking about with the MCU shows on Disney Plus. It's like Falcon and Winter Soldier feels like a movie.
It does.
It feels like an MCU movie.
The lines are blurring.
Loki feels like that too. So and it's really exciting. It's really exciting. As a fan of sci-fi and superhero stuff, especially, it's like the shows are getting to the point where they're as good as the movies. Yeah.
Yes. Like the race is on. Like, do more. Entertain me more. Give me more.
Entertain me more.
Yes. Are you not entertained?
Oh, you not? Oh, yeah. So anyway.
This is fun.
This was fun.
Yeah,
I think, yes, we've pulled it off.
Managed it. Yeah, this is, like I said, it's as good as I knew it was going to be. Yeah. So I'm really, really happy. Yeah. I'm glad we did this.
Me too. I'm glad we did, because we wanted to do something for a while, and we had a couple of false starts. But yeah.
Yeah. I saw this. I was like, I want to talk about this with somebody. Steve.
Yeah. And like I say, I appreciate it because it gave me an excuse to finally watch the movie.
Yeah.
And also to watch a couple of other Westerns that I hadn't seen that I wanted to see. So it gave me an opportunity to catch up on a bunch of good movies.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Go dip your toes in the cinema.
Absolutely. The cinema. It's like I could go back and watch another episode of a show I've seen a million times before, or I could watch something new. I think I'm going to watch something new. So
Good.
all right.
Excellent.
Well, thanks everybody for watching. Kristi, of course, thank you as always for joining me. We will definitely have to do this again sometime.
Yeah. Gerne. With pleasure.
All right.
What it means in German. I've been doing my German lessons today.
Woo!
But maybe with less rosy cheeks. I look like
That
I don't
is-
know. I look like I came outside in the winter in the middle of Wisconsin. Actually, I'm that rosy. So,
well, wrap a scarf around your face next time. Come on.
there you go.
Come on. You come on my channel with windburn. It's just not professional.
More like wine flush.
Why do they call them wine blossoms? There's gin blossoms and there's wine blossoms.
It's no, they have well, it's not for wine, but they do have they call it Glühwein when they have mulled alcohol wine.
Oh yeah.
Because it makes your cheeks glow. Like this.
Is that why they call it glow wine? I never knew that. I knew that I knew about Glühwein, but I didn't know that's why they called it that, because it makes your cheeks glow. No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I learned something today too. How about that?
There you go. Every day's a school day.
Every day's a school day. All right. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Take it easy, and
Bye, everyone.
we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.